Here with Aaron Day. Thanks so much for coming on. I wanted to talk about Bitcoin, the potential hijacking of it. I'm new to Bitcoin. I bought Bitcoin not long ago, so at a loss. Thankfully, I didn't buy it at like 123. But I thought it dipped, and it's been dipping since I bought it. So, we're just gonna get into Bitcoin. I'm totally a novice on this, but I've noticed it's all over the Epstein files. I just got a book by Roger Day, Hijacking Bitcoin. I was reading that. Turned out he's extremely controversial. To me, a lot of the stuff is making sense, but I don't really know what to make of this. I'll probably actually have a debate or another one with the opposite perspective of you after this. But let's just start a really base. Most people that are watching this will probably understand Bitcoin, but why don't you give a real quick breakdown of what Bitcoin is, what it was created for, the purposes, all that?
Sure. So let me go back to kind of where all of this began, which is 2008. So recall in 2008, we had this big financial crisis and
Yes.
we had this huge, massive, almost $1 trillion bailout where none of the bankers were held accountable. 10 million people lost their homes, so on and so forth. So this is kind of the stage for Bitcoin. And in fact, after that point, you actually had somewhat unity. You had the Occupy Wall Street people on the left, you had the Tea Party people on the right, but people were pretty agreed with the fact that bankers are the bad guys,
Yes.
and they tend to do a very good job of socializing risk, but privatizing their gains otherwise. And so Bitcoin came around right after that, around the 2009 time period. And the original purpose of Bitcoin, and it even says this in what's called the white paper, which is a document that outlines what Bitcoin is about, what it's supposed to be. It's peer to peer electronic cash. So the point behind this is you're not going to have a central bank. The system that we have right now is, we basically have a group of private banks that print money out of thin air,
Yes.
backed by government debt, and they profit off of every single transaction that we have. And then they manipulate the interest rates to reduce the supply of money. And then people end up losing their homes, so on and so forth. So this is the system that we have. The idea with Bitcoin is we would get rid of these third parties. You would no longer have central banks or governments issuing money. You would have this decentralized form of currency that couldn't be stopped by any third party, government, or bank. And so this was the real excitement and enthusiasm about Bitcoin. And it's not just something that's, for the United States. This is a global opportunity to provide economic freedom around the world. I mean, it turns out 71% of the planet makes less than $10 a day.
Wow.
So the ability to have a currency that doesn't have high transaction fees and doesn't have government corruption in the middle is really something that is a game changer for humanity. And this is how I learned about Bitcoin. I learned about Bitcoin in 2012 in New Hampshire at a conference called Liberty Forum. I heard this guy, Roger Ver, give a talk about it.
Mhm.
And he talked about it in just those terms. This is a way for us to spread economic opportunity around the world, to stop wars. I mean, we wouldn't have these wars if bankers weren't profiting off of
Yes.
both sides of it.
Hmm.
And so that was my initial introduction to it. And so I started using it in 2012. And when I started using it in the beginning for Bitcoin, it wasn't just that it was an ideologically better thing, right? It wasn't just that here's money that doesn't involve these central banks and these other players. It was actually better money. It was better, faster, and cheaper to use. I remember receiving my first Bitcoin payment, and it was nearly instant. No bank or anybody involved. The transaction fees were a few cents. And at that time in 2012, there was nothing like this in the traditional financial system. We didn't have Venmo. We didn't
That's
have
right.
uh, these Apple Pay, Google Pay, and everything else. And so that was the beginning of Bitcoin, and that was the enthusiasm around Bitcoin.
That's very interesting. Like you mentioned, 2008 financial crisis. I watched so many of my friends suffer. I was thriving during that time because fighting was going good, but I watched my friends losing their houses, their homes, their wives. and then I didn't follow politics time. Then recently looked into the last couple of years and saw the bankers, we paid them to bail them out. Crash. They intentionally crashed our economy. And then they're like, whoops, bail themselves out. It's just disgusting. And you mentioned Roger Ver. I contacted him trying to interview him, but he said he apparently has a gag order from the United States government and cannot give an interview. that is very interesting. But it's like
That's a whole that's an entire other story that we can get into, and this is actually probably why I'm here, because to continue the story. So I was using Bitcoin around 2012, and in New Hampshire there were shops and restaurants that were accepting Bitcoin directly. There were Bitcoin meetups where
but
people
what year
would.
is this?
This is going all the way back to 2011.
Wow.
I mean, this is how early this was, but 2011, all the way through kind of 2015, 2017, more and more stores were signing up. You had businesses that were setting up point of sale terminals so that they could accept cryptocurrency. There was even in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, a couple of guys actually created a store called the Bitcoin Shop, and it was just an assortment of merchandise, but you could only use cryptocurrency in the shop. So people don't know this story and this side of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin was really getting momentum at this point, and large retailers and businesses were starting to accept Bitcoin directly. So Overstock.com was taking Bitcoin directly. So literally you'd go to the website, you could use your credit card, or you could send Bitcoin to their Bitcoin wallet. Microsoft was accepting Bitcoin.
So it's
Expedia.
quick, easy. You could just easy send it over, because that's
Yeah.
extremely difficult to do now. Someone actually just taught me how to do that. We can maybe discuss that at the end, but it's like that's so difficult to do. I had a lot of friends. I was from San Francisco, so I had a lot of friends who were into Bitcoin early on. I was a genius and waited till it hit 85 to buy it, but I had friends were buying it at like $200, and they were super into it. I know they were like huge believers, like you're saying. They talked about like buying stuff on it, but I've noticed it seems harder to buy stuff on it now. Would you say that's correct, right? That's kind of what you're saying.
It's more difficult, but what happened in 2017, just as all of this excitement was building, all of a sudden the fees went through the roof. So instead of having transaction fees of a few cents, the average transaction fee jumped to $50 at one
For
point.
Bitcoin sales? Oh my
And
God.
instead of transactions settling in a minute or 10 minutes or whatever it happened to be in a short period of time, it was taking 7 days, 10 days just to complete a transaction. So you can imagine what retailers' response to this was, which is, we can't use this. This isn't better than a credit card, right? If you're a merchant and you're accepting a credit card, you're going to pay 30 cents plus 3.29% or whatever it is. That's better than $50, right? So Bitcoin went from being
unless you're
better,
selling
faster,
really expensive products, yeah.
Yeah, now it's not even usable. And so then people stopped using it as peer-to-peer digital cash. Now it turns out I didn't know all of the details about what was going on behind the scenes at the time. I was just using it. So my enthusiasm was, hey, this is a cool new thing. I was actually using it for politics. I was using it to raise money to help support candidates and to actually pay volunteers on the ground in New Hampshire in cryptocurrency to put up yard signs and do all this other stuff. I'm like, this is great. This is a new monetary system.
Yeah.
And so, but what we learned later on, and what Roger Ver wrote about in his book Hijacking Bitcoin, is there was a whole bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes, the hijacking of Bitcoin, and the narrative shifted entirely. So Bitcoin went from being peer-to-peer digital cash that you use for everyday transactions to now people were starting to call it digital gold. They were saying it's not something that you use for commerce, it's something that you hold and you never spend it. And it's something that, it should be slow and expensive.
So
Like this. So this whole
the whole
narrative
purpose completely abandons it then. I mean, ideally something's going up in value too, not devaluing like the dollar. But if you can't spend it like cash, that defeats the whole purpose, isn't it? Wasn't that the entire purpose, like you were just saying?
It was the entire purpose. It's the first sentence in the actual white paper itself. Satoshi, who's this anonymous developer, we don't really know who created Bitcoin.
Yeah,
and
that's always a little weird to me.
But even still, there were discussion boards where he was discussing the fact that Bitcoin was there to replace Visa and MasterCard. Bitcoin is something
Mm-hmm.
that should be able to do 25,000 transactions per second. And what happened with this hijacked narrative is some people came in and decided artificially that we're going to cap the what are called the size of the blocks, meaning how many transactions can actually be processed every 10 minutes. They're going to artificially cap it at 1 megabyte. And not to get into too much technical stuff, but it means that Bitcoin was throttled and could only do 7 transactions per second.
So someone came in and intentionally throttled it?
It was a move. Well, it turns out it was a movement. It turns out there were a lot of players involved,
Is
and I recommend that people.
the Epstein
I
stuff
recommend.
coming out? Or anyway, sorry, go ahead.
I recommend that people read Hijacking Bitcoin to see a big part of the behind the scenes, because you can see what's going on with the specific developers at the time. One simple way I like to describe it is it's kind of like with this environmentalism. Remember, Al Gore all of a sudden started pushing carbon credits, right? And so this whole idea behind carbon credits is we're going to manufacture a crisis around carbon.
Yes.
And then we're going to create a market where we cap the amount of carbon, and then we drive up the price. We have people bidding on these carbon credits that they can trade with each other. But it was all artificial. Well, that's what happened with Bitcoin. They came in and said, we're going to limit the size of these blocks. And then people, if you want your transaction to go faster, you have to bid to pay more for your transaction fee. So this is, I call it kind of a cap and trade system. And what we find in Hijacking Bitcoin is there was this shadowy character named John Dillon, who was tied to the intelligence community, who actually funded one of the developers, a developer named Peter Todd, to implement this replace by fee. So we know in this book who the players are, and we see the communications between Dillon and Peter Todd. So it's not like this isn't a conspiracy.
Have we seen it for a while, or is this stuff that's just come out in the Epstein files? Because I know a lot of stuff has just come out in the Epstein files.
That even builds beyond that. But you had these internal things that were already going on behind the scenes.
So this was already known before this.
This is known before the Epstein files, and this is what Roger put in his book, and then goes into even more detail. And this then dovetails into Epstein. But a group of developers, early Bitcoin core developers, went off and started their own company called Blockstream. And this company, Blockstream, profits by Bitcoin being slow and expensive because they build what are called layer 2 solutions on top of Bitcoin. So in other words, we're going to throttle this thing, and now we're going to build solutions to solve for the problem that we just created. And so this was Blockstream. And so Blockstream was a combination of some of the early developers, a guy by the name of Adam Back, who is in the Epstein files, sometimes referred to as Andy Back as well, who we now know visited Epstein. But even before the Epstein information, we knew who some of the other funding sources were for Blockstream, including a guy named Henry DeCastries, who was the chairman of the Bilderberg Group.
Oh, Jesus.
You had all of these players.
They're here to help you.
Yeah, we're here to help you. So in other words, we're going to make this thing slow and expensive. We're going to cap it. And then we're going to have a bunch of bankers and now, Epstein and other people invest in the solution. So it was captured by traditional finance and in part by people tied to the intelligence community. And we knew some of that, but frankly, none of us knew the depths of it with Epstein.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my piece of this comes into, I won't go through all the detail and my backstory, but I'm a serial entrepreneur. And, the second company I started in the healthcare space was destroyed by Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, Attorney General Eric Holder. I wasn't targeted, unlike certain friends that I have that have been explicitly targeted. I was just collateral damage. And so that turned me into a liberty activist. That's how I ended up in New Hampshire and working on political activism, but that's when I learned about Bitcoin. And so in 2019, I realized we're not going to be able to vote our way out of this. So I stopped using a personal bank account and started living on crypto gold and silver. And so it's not actually an easy thing to do, but it is a possible thing to do. And what I learned kind of after, post-COVID, I wasn't even all that surprised about COVID, but what did catch my attention was when friends of mine were being targeted explicitly by the federal government. And these were specifically people that were libertarian leaning, that were involved in cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
And they were promoting the use of cryptocurrency as a tool for freedom, as a replacement for central banks, as a way to move beyond censorship. And so one person in particular, Ian Freeman, this really kind of, got me digging into this whole what's going on with the hijacking of Bitcoin and CBDCs. Ian Freeman and his business partner, Mark Edge, have a syndicated radio talk show called Free Talk Live. And they've been promoting liberty, promoting the Free State Project. And they started talking about Bitcoin in 2010. In fact, Roger Ver learned about Bitcoin from Ian Freeman on this Free Talk Live show. Ian was selling people Bitcoin. He actually had kind of a Bitcoin exchange, and he would provide that as a service to onboard people to cryptocurrency. Well, he was targeted and raided by 5 different departments of the federal government. They came in and busted down his door with a bearcat, the whole 9 yards, for essentially selling Bitcoin without a license. Now, what's interesting about this is Ian actually had an opinion letter from an attorney saying he didn't need a license because in New Hampshire, there's some different rules. He is currently sitting in federal prison for 8 years for selling Bitcoin without a license. Now, so what I decided to do is, why is this happening? Why are these people, Liberty crypto people, being targeted? And that's when I learned about central bank digital currencies. And I don't know if you followed that much.
Not really.
But central bank digital currencies are basically taking the fiat currency that we have, the dollars that are printed out of thin air, and making them programmable, trackable, and censorable.
Yes. So defeating that's the entire purpose of Bitcoin, was to not be trackable and traceable. And
that's what we thought. And so all of a sudden, what I found is that in March of 2022, President Biden signed an executive order, and that executive order authorized the government to pursue a CBDC. So it became government policy to create one of these dystopian programmable digital currencies. And that same executive order authorized they called it in the document, a whole of government crackdown on crypto, meaning they were bringing in the Treasury Department, the IRS, DHS, you name it. Why? Because people wouldn't want a CBDC, and you have to get rid of the competition. If there are people out there like Ian or like Roger talking about how you can use these cryptocurrencies to circumvent the tyranny that comes from central banks and so forth, but they needed to shut that down. And so that's why Ian and others were being targeted. So I actually wrote a book about it and studied, what was going on. And I found there are now 134 countries around the world working on CBDCs. These countries represent 98% of the total GDP or economic output of the planet.
Yeah.
So in other words, this is a coordinated global thing to put in place.
Real quick, plug your book and where people can get it. Since you mentioned your book, you might as well tell people where they can get it if they might want to hear more after hearing this talk.
Sure. I mean, my book is called The Final Countdown: Crypto, Gold, Silver, and the People's Last Stand Against Central Bank Digital Tyranny. But you can just look for The Final Countdown. It's on Amazon. And and the book talks about my whole argument is, and I put out the book as a warning, which is central bank digital currencies are just one part of an overall technocratic plan. There's more movement towards centralization. So you have digital IDs, you have central bank digital currencies, and then you have social credit systems and AI surveillance. And there's a big push for this happening.
Thanks for watching Fight Back Podcast. If you like the show, like, subscribe, or share the video. There's also donation links in the descriptions. Here coming in, it's all connected, as we're seeing in the Epstein files, and the banking is kind of the head of the snake. That's the conclusion I've come to. That's their enemy number one. And for me, I'm on their target, so I want money that they can't track in case I need to disappear out of the country real quick, that they can't just shut off my bank accounts.
That's exactly right. And so, and what people don't realize is that we don't need a CBDC most of our money is already digital. I think 96% of our money is digital.
Mm.
It can already be tracked. In fact, if you do a financial transaction greater than $10,000, a report is automatically sent to the Treasury Department.
Yep.
And they already have in place what's called the Bank Secrecy Act, all of these know your customer anti-money laundering laws. So whenever you go to set up an account, you have to fill out all of this paperwork. In fact, it costs $61 billion a year just to comply with all of this paperwork, but it doesn't actually catch any criminals. It only catches like 0.1%. It's just added cost and tracking and overhead. And so now, if you added a CBDC on top of that, that would give them even more control.
Yeah, they want to be able to track everything. They have exact. The point of Bitcoin was to be anonymous and hide it. They want it where they can track everything, shut everything down, and it's terrifying. I was kind of shocked. I posted a picture of the hijacking Bitcoin, like, oh, fascinating book I'm reading. And I had a lot of people mad at me, which I was a little confused about. And I will bring someone on the opposite side to try to tell the story, but I wasn't quite understanding. I wasn't seeing these like terrible things and lies that he was allegedly saying, as we see now, like Howard Lutnick, demons all over the Epstein files, and other awful people.
The story has all kinds of twists and turns. So when I was studying CBDCs, so Biden's talking about a CBDC. So I wanted to research, well, what's going on in the United States with CBDCs? And that's what I found. And most people in the US don't know this. The United States, well, actually, the Federal Reserve has already completed 3 CBDC pilots. So they're not just talking, and this stuff goes back to like 2018. So when I'm digging into this research, all 3 of these CBDC pilots come out of MIT in a group headed by Joy Ito. And so I wrote an article a few years back, and I said, well, it looks like, because we knew Jeffrey Epstein had funded this MIT group. So I said, it looks like Jeffrey Epstein was funding these CBDC pilots. Well, then it turns out Roger's story with hijacking Bitcoin merges with my story in a way that I could not have possibly dreamed of, which is that Bitcoin is an open source project. There's no corporate structure behind it at all. There's no funding for it. So you basically have these open source developers that work on the code of the project, and everybody can see the code of the project. Well, it turns out developers don't do work for free.
Yeah.
And people don't audit code to see if it's secure or not for free, right? Somebody's paying these developers. And so there was a group called the Bitcoin Foundation that was formed to be a nonprofit to fund the development according to the white paper and to maintain the integrity of the project. And so this was the overarching vision of this. Well, it turns out in this time that we're talking about where this hijacking occurred, the chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation is a guy named Brock Pierce. Now, Brock Pierce has a really storied past. People can dig into, you could just Google him. And
I think some stuff with little boys. Is that guy, or am I mixing him up? I don't want to.
Well, it's the Digital Entertainment Network. And I actually interacted, this affected me all the way back in the late 90s, early 2000s. He started a company, or he didn't start the company, but he was the CEO of a company that was going to go public. And then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose because the founders were charged with having sex with underage boys. They fled to Spain.
Yeah.
And there was a whole ordeal.
I just this is disturbed. It's the allegations of like little boys, absolutely sick and disgusting, deprived people.
And there's a documentary on this, and I put it on.
This guy was in charge of it, and he was tied to Epstein too, right? So this is how crazy this is. The engine, the people that are designing the Bitcoin, they're supposed to check to make sure it's like okay, not being manipulated or being paid for and funded by like guys like Epstein and this guy.
Yeah, the story gets even crazier. I'm even processing this stuff over the last week.
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure I'm processing right. Is what I said pretty much correct? That's like crazy. And then they want to one more thing. I want to be sure I understand it. So they're trying to make it so this would be the sole way people could like buy and sell things in America through these government projects instead of Bitcoin, like digital cash.
CBDCs are an attempt to completely make our currency centrally controlled.
Everything we do. So there'd be no cash, nothing else, no Bitcoin. That's what they're working towards.
Yes, and it gets worse than that. And again, this is actually my area of focus and expertise. There's something right now called the Clarity Act. So CBDCs and stablecoins, which I consider to be backdoor CBDCs, that is creating these digital tokens for that you use to buy and sell things, right?
Mhm.
The Clarity Act is looking to create digital tokens that represent everything that you own. So we're not just money only represents 5% of overall assets. Most people don't have their net worth
Yeah.
in money. They have it in real estate. They have it in stocks, bonds,
Yes.
401ks, gold, silver. The Clarity Act is looking to put in place regulations for the tokenization of all of those things. So imagine what I was talking about in terms of, with a CBDC or these government regulated stablecoins, they can program, track, and censor your money. Now they'll be able to program and track and censor everything that you own. This is how big of a deal
So they
this
want to
is
know if I
with.
own gold. They want my stocks. And potentially they could tax you on your net worth.
Yeah, well, tax you, or let's say they decide they don't like what you have to say. Let's say you're
My
controversial,
credit
for
score is a little
example.
bit low.
Yeah, your social credit score is a little bit low. I'm sorry, you can't sell your stocks, you can't
Yeah.
sell your bond,
I've already been
or you
deemed I'm not
can't
allowed to
buy.
have a check mark on X, so it shows my credit score is extremely low. It was stripped away from me despite being famous.
Exactly. Well, this is what they're implementing now. This is actively going on now, even separate from these files. They're putting the laws in place. And by the way, we'll get to this, but Howard Lutnick, it turns out, benefits from all of this. But going back to this situation with Brock Pierce, so he has this thing in the early 2000s. Then he starts a company selling digital gold within World of Warcraft, the video game. And Steve Bannon ends up becoming the CEO of that company, which that all becomes weird because this is also tied into the Epstein files. But it turns out uh, Pierce met Epstein, we think for the first time. It could have been before this,
Mm.
but in
Oh
2011
wow.
on Little St. James Island. And he started advising him on crypto all the way back then. And we didn't know any of this. People didn't know. The only thing that we knew about Epstein was we knew that he had this investment in this MIT group, and we know that there's one article that's ever been published where he was interviewed talking about cryptocurrency. And in that interview, he says Bitcoin is not a currency, it's a store of value. So the only time Jeffrey Epstein ever said anything about Bitcoin, it's to say that, oh, it's not peer-to-peer digital cash as outlined in the white paper. It is digital gold. It's something you're supposed to
That's just so
save.
stupid. Like, I mean, I get it. I want it to go up in value, but wait, there's no purpose if we can't spend it as cash. At least that's how my mind perceives it.
Yeah, that's generally how money works. I mean, you're not if you can't use it as a medium of exchange to buy and sell things,
Yeah.
then it's not going to become a
Let's say I
very
have to flee
effective
the
store.
country and I have some Bitcoin and I can't buy anything with it. How am I going to flee the country?
Yeah.
If I can't, I
Well,
want to buy a plane ticket right now. I don't want to wait like, an hour or 7 days or whatever. So it's not really money if you can't buy something instantly. Interesting.
so they didn't want it to be money, but at the same time, we now find out that Epstein invested in Blockstream. So he invested in that company that I talked about earlier that benefits from Bitcoin being kind of throttled at 7 transactions per second. So in other words, he profited by Bitcoin becoming slow and expensive by the creation of this new Blockstream company. But then it gets even worse
It's
than
already
that. And
getting
this
pretty
is the
bad.
thing. It's really bad. And actually, again, we've only scratched the surface of this, but it turns out he invested in Blockstream 8 months before he ended up. So that Bitcoin Foundation that I mentioned, that Brock Pierce was the chair of, that was responsible for funding these open source developers, it collapsed in 2015. There were a lot of people that were willing to step up and pick up the slack to fund the developers, but the group miraculously that ended up saving the day was the MIT group funded by Jeffrey Epstein. So in other words, the group that Brock Pierce, who's Epstein's crypto advisor, that group crashes. And then the group that Epstein is funding through MIT ends up taking over the funding of these developers. And those developers cement the changes to Bitcoin to keep it slow and
Yeah.
expensive,
Just real quick,
as opposed to being peer-to-peer
real quick
cash.
to understand this. These are the guys that make sure nothing's wrong with it, to make sure it's moving slow, make sure nothing's shady going on behind the scenes. These are the guys that are doing that. The guys that monitor it all are being funded by Jeffrey Epstein.
They're being funded by Jeffrey Epstein, and they're the gatekeepers for the code changes. So there were code changes that were made and cemented during this time period to make sure that it couldn't have big blocks and couldn't do a lot of transactions and couldn't be used as peer-to-peer digital cash. All of those changes happened through this group that was funded by Epstein through MIT. And then Epstein was an investor in a company that benefited from those changes.
Yeah. This is like, I don't know about Bitcoin, but this is crazy. That's like, so it was intentionally slowed down. You say big blocks. So if it's smaller blocks, it moves faster. Like, I'm sorry, I'm like, don't know anything about Bitcoin.
If there's smaller blocks, the blocks are how many transactions you can actually process. But Bitcoin works every 10 minutes, new blocks are added to the blockchain. And you have these computers all over the world that are computing to solve these math puzzles. And if your computer wins, you get what's called the block reward, and then you get to be the one that adds the transactions to the blockchain, and then you get the transaction fees as well on top of the little block reward that you get. If the blocks are small, then you can only have a set number of transactions every 10 minutes. The original design in the white paper had no block size at all. There was a 1 minute block size put in very early, just as they were testing things and trying to get the network to work. And then these people came in and tried, imagine you're tinkering with something and you're trying it out. You put in this little small test variable because no one's using the software and you're trying to work out the kinks. And then other people come in and say, oh, that thing that we put in for testing purposes, that's now a permanent hard cap. And now we're going to completely build the entire system based on this.
Do you know how many engineers they had hired?
What?
Do you know how many engineers they had hired to do this or no?
Well, it's an open source project, so there are a lot of people that committed to it. But the MIT group funded 3 primary developers, and we even know their names. This story gets even more wild, and I had even reported on this. One of the developers that MIT took over the funding for is a guy named Corey Fields. Corey Fields worked on, again, I don't want to get too technical, but SegWit and Lightning Network, which are the 2 projects that really cemented Bitcoin as digital gold instead of digital cash. So this guy, Corey Fields, worked on those projects. He later then became a co-author through MIT of Project Hamilton. Project Hamilton is the CBDC pilot that MIT worked on with the Federal Reserve that was designed to replace the dollar.
Damn.
And so let me put this in perspective. They took Bitcoin that was supposed to be used as cash with no limitation on how many transactions per second. They throttled it at 7 transactions per second. One of the developers that was involved in that, Corey Fields, went on to work on building the digital dollar through Project Hamilton. That project can do 1.7 million transactions per second.
So wait, so he designed one really quick and slowed down Bitcoin?
Well, no, he didn't slow it down. He was just one of the people.
Yeah, not him, but basically the same people that are trying to slow down Bitcoin. They designed their own to be extremely fast.
They designed their own to be extremely fast.
So look how good this is, and this one's not, kind of a scenario.
Yeah. So people are saying, well, hey, Bitcoin's now digital gold. And then they came up with this thing it's called Lightning Network that they said would ultimately be cash. But yet at the same time, the same developers that hobbled Bitcoin created a completely different project, Project Hamilton, that would be controlled centrally by the government. And so this is a massive hijacking, right? So this is we basically neutered Bitcoin. If you go back to 2009, banks, they didn't realize it right away, but banks started to get worried about Bitcoin, right? If people started using Bitcoin instead of our printed out of air fake stuff that we're doing, that this could be a real threat. So they came in and made it so Bitcoin couldn't be used for that purpose. And then the central bank itself, the Federal Reserve Bank, worked with some Bitcoin developers to create a centralized version that they could fully control.
Yeah, I'm shocked, but I shouldn't be. I mean, is this fixable, or should we save that question for the end?
Oh, I'm not even done. But wait, there's more.
No, that's what I'm saying. I'll save that question because I know there's a lot more. It's just crazy hearing all this. I'm trying to process this. I mean, I shouldn't be shocked because we know these people we're dealing with.
So they shifted this narrative, and so it's now it's no longer digital cash. Now we're saying it's digital gold. But in order for it to be successful as digital gold, it would have to either retain its value or go up in price, right? I mean, obviously, if Bitcoin fell in value, then people wouldn't buy the digital gold narrative.
Yeah.
Well, now enter Brock Pierce again. So Brock Pierce again is involved in the blow up of the Bitcoin Foundation, handing the devs over to MIT that then work on, slowing Bitcoin down. He's a co-founder of Tether. Tether is what's called a stable coin. So it is a cryptocurrency where one coin equals $1. And now in theory, it's supposed to be backed by dollars or things that are worth dollars, so that, I mean, if I create a token and I say it's worth $1, then, presumably it's backed by something.
It should be.
Well, it should be. Well, it turns out on two separate occasions, once by the CFTC and once by the state of New York, Tether was found to not actually have the assets backing.
They don't even have the Bitcoin they're selling you.
They don't have dollars, gold, Bitcoin. They don't have the assets necessary to be able to make the claim that one Tether is worth $1.
Yeah.
In fact, I think in one of the analysis they determined that they had only 26% coverage.
So they're printing money out of thin air, just like the Federal Reserve, like without that illegally, and no one was arrested. I assume.
No, no. It's like a meta Ponzi, right? We're printing money out of thin air, and then they're printing tokens out of thin air, backed by the dollar that's printed out of thin air. Like, this is a new level of Ponzi scheme.
Damn.
But here's the kicker. In 2017 was a huge year for the price of Bitcoin increasing. And this is where people started to get really excited about it and think, hey, maybe this is a store of value. Maybe this is something that would compete with gold. Well, University of Texas did an analysis that found that 50% of the increase in price of Bitcoin was due to Tether. So in other words, it looks like
they're not even real.
They printed Tether out of thin air to pump the price of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So I know this story is complex.
I'm shocked I haven't heard this all yet. This is crazy. I know there's stuff all over the Epstein files in there, but isn't Tether tied in? Isn't there some ties with Howard Lutnick or no?
Yeah.
That guy's a demon. Yeah. Looking at him disgusts me.
The Howard Lutnick story starts. Now keep in mind, one of the other things that we've learned about all of this. So Brock Pierce is a co-founder of Tether. And in the emails, we see that he's advising Epstein on a whole bunch of investments. One of the other investments that we just learned in the last week that Epstein invested in is a company called Circle. Circle is the second largest stable coin. So Tether's a stable coin, one coin equals $1. So is Circle has something called USDC. Turns out Epstein invested in that very early through Brock Pierce. We even have the email where he says, hey, here are the documents for the investment fund that we're going to use to funnel your funds. And so I went and looked up, okay, well, what did this cryptocurrency partners invest in? And lo and behold, there it is, Circle. So Epstein's involved in funding stable coins at the very beginning. Now, I don't have proof of this yet because Tether has a really shady history in terms of the shell companies and everything involved and who owns what. But I would be stunned if Epstein wasn't, through some backdoor channel, an early investor in Tether as well. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, so Brock starts Tether. Tether is responsible for a big part of the price appreciation of Bitcoin, and they have all these struggles. They've never been able to pass an audit. Never. They have, in fact, they've gotten to the point where no audit firm will even work with them to try to do an audit to see if the reserves are there.
I have a question.
All of a sudden,
wait, if me and you started a company like this and did this, would we be arrested or would they just ignore us too? Because if not, let's just get our own going. We can sell Bitcoin that doesn't exist.
Well, it depends on how politically connected we are. I guess it depends on how.
But a normal person would be arrested, correct? This is like something that doesn't.
Yeah. No, personally, you'd be arrested.
Yeah, this seems insane to me. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I'm getting that right. Okay.
Absolutely. This is an immediate go to jail. Do not collect $200.
Yeah, if not, I was going to start selling Bitcoin.
Yeah, right. Well, so now, so Tether that never passes an audit, and then all of a sudden, Howard Lutnick gets involved. Now, Howard Lutnick several things. We now know he was tied to Epstein. He claimed to not have been. He claimed that he visited his New York apartment in 2005 or 2006 and was disgusted. And it turns out he's Epstein's next door neighbor. It turns out they've done business deals together. It turns out he's invested alongside Epstein. And so Lutnick lied. He actually just explicitly lied about the nature of his relationship with Epstein. But all of a sudden he comes in and gets involved with Tether. And he invests his firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, invests $600 million in Tether.
It's a good chunk of money.
And the reason that they did this is so that his firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, could manage all of the treasuries backing Tether. So now what's interesting about this is, remember, they've never done an audit before. And there's never been any regulation on stablecoins that state, if you have a stablecoin, you could have a stablecoin and back it by gold or by Bitcoin or by land or whatever it happens to be. There's nothing that says that you have to have a stablecoin that's backed by treasuries. Well, Lutnick gets involved, cuts this deal to manage what I believe is now $180 billion worth of treasuries. It wasn't that at that time. And then all of a sudden gets involved in government. Now you have to understand, Lutnick is not a diehard Republican. People did not know who Lutnick was politically. In fact, the Epstein files show he was trying to get money from Epstein for a fundraiser that he was doing for Hillary Clinton. Wow. He did a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton in 2016, right? So this guy is not known in Republican circles. He's not even that kind of politically active. He invests in Tether to manage the treasuries, and then all of a sudden he becomes the chair of Trump's transition committee, which is a powerful role. That role is responsible for recruiting members of the entire cabinet. So the Treasury Secretary, Defense Secretary, all of those people. This is something that as heading up the transition team, Lutnick is like right in the middle of. That's kind of odd to have this power when you have no political experience, and the last thing that you did was do a fundraiser for Trump's competitor in 2016. Lutnick was actually trying to put himself up for Treasury Secretary. So think about the conflict here. He's just negotiated a deal to manage all the treasuries for Tether, and now he's trying to get the role of the Treasury Secretary.
That's a conflict of interest. So this guy, I didn't know who he was till recently, but I just get like a disgust when I look at him. And he bought a home from Epstein. Like you said, he was next door neighbor. He bought a home from him. He had, one of those guys that happened to miss work on 9/11 again. They lived in units 9 and 11. Interesting things. It's like there's something about this guy just absolutely disgusts me.
Well, as you dig into it, there are allegations of, and I want to say allegations. I don't want to get into trouble with this, but allegations of money laundering. You're right that he wasn't there on 9/11, and there are even allegations that he misappropriated funds for the victim relief for his company from 9/11. Like, it's just, the more you dig into this, the worse that it gets. But now let's fast forward. They passed this thing called the Genius Act. And this just happened. Trump pushed this. The Genius Act says that in order to be a legal stablecoin, you have to back your stablecoin by only U.S. treasuries. So in other words, Howard Lutnick and his firm is the single biggest beneficiary of the Genius Act. And now, he's essentially managing all of the money that backs Tether. Now, to put this in scale, I think this is the biggest financial scandal in human history. And I know it's a little bit complicated to explain.
Sounds insane, though. Sounds huge.
There's this book by G. Edward Griffin called "The Creature from Jekyll Island," and it talks about. It's a great book, and he talks about how the Federal Reserve was created. Basically, a bunch of shadowy guys got together off of the coast of Georgia and decided, hey, we're going to create a new monetary system where we print the money out of thin air backed by government debt. And that's the system that we have. If you look at what Lutnick's doing, he's creating I might call it the creature from Epstein's island. But a situation here where we're now having a digital currency, right? So from our perspective as citizens, now you have to understand, Tether can be tracked and programmed and censored. And this happens all of the time. People are constantly having even before the Genius Act, people were having these Tether seized,
Yeah,
and
I've noticed tons of Tether. I looked that up. Tons of Tether wallets were seized, like constantly.
constantly seized. This is even before the Genius Act. But essentially, imagine now we're creating a digital dollar where we have less freedom, we have less financial privacy. But instead of having the Federal Reserve, which is a group of private banks, there's one firm controlling all of the treasuries backing Tether, and it's Cantor Fitzgerald. This guy's becoming like the new Federal Reserve.
Wow.
And so every time you spend Tether, you're making money for Howard Lutnick and his firm. He has a complete control over every transaction that's done through Tether. This is an unprecedented fraud. And remember, this is Tether is a crypto project that's still never passed an audit. And what they've been able to do with these Tether, in addition to pumping up the price of cryptocurrencies, they've purchased like 24 tons of gold. They're buying land. They're buying real assets with these tokens that no one can determine if they've ever been backed by anything. And now Lutnick is there in the center after pushing a law that he personally benefits from. All these people complain about Nancy Pelosi and insider trading. Well, what do you call it when you cut a deal to essentially manage all of the money
Insider
backing
trading, the
it's
extreme
beyond
case of it.
Yeah, it's beyond that. I don't even know how to examine this. So now this is what we're dealing with here. This is the size and the scale of this. And so, we get less freedom. Howard Lutnick gets more money. And this is happening without people resisting or knowing about it.
Yeah, is this like widely known what you're talking about? Because I have not. This is insane what you're telling me, and I have not seen this around. I don't really follow the Bitcoin stuff, but I did see Lutnick all over it, but I didn't understand the depth of it.
So this is the problem, and this is kind of the problem with politics. And I left this part out, but I actually ran for president in 2024
Oh, nice.
specifically to raise awareness about the threat of CBDCs. So my book that I mentioned, The Final Countdown, Vivek Ramaswamy read the book. I had 3 conversations with him about it. He pushed Trump to come out against CBDCs the night before the presidential primary in New Hampshire. And so he signed an executive order that says the United States will not have a central bank digital currency. Mm. So the problem is, because obviously as we're even going through this conversation, it's technical. You have to unpack, you have to understand how the current system works to understand, So most people just dismissed it and said, yeah, MAGA, we're not going to have a digital, a CBDC. And so everybody's been completely disarmed. And now what they've done is they've passed essentially a backdoor CBDC. So rather than having the Federal Reserve issue it, let's just have something that, Howard Lutnick and Cantor Fitzgerald can issue. Now, Tether's not the only stable coin, but it ends up being the same outcome as we have with the Federal Reserve. You have a small group of people managing all of the money that are then issuing digital tokens that are controlled by the government and the Federal Reserve. It's a complete loss for us. And I will tell you how bad this is. Last year, there was $33 trillion worth of transaction volume using these stable coins. That's more than Visa, right? This is so imagine if Kamala Harris had won and said, we're going to implement a CBDC, she'd bring in some like DEI squad and they'd never figure it out. They would have never implemented it, right? Yeah. It would have been kind of like the Obamacare.
Just too dumb, a bunch of bumbling idiots.
Yeah, complete bumbling idiots. In this case, we've captured $33 trillion worth of transaction volume, and we're putting that now under control of Congress. The same people that give you know your customer laws, the same people that do the transaction reports, the same people that share your information. Banks share your information with the IRS and can debank you. This has actually already happened. This legislation has passed. And it's implemented. And Tether just, I think 2 weeks ago, launched the first official stablecoin under this Genius Act. And so this has happened. I've been one of the only people trying to sound the alarm on this. And the Clarity Act is worse because this is going to apply now, this level of control to your retirement fund and stocks, bonds, and gold and everything else. Like this is the digital tyranny that I've been trying to.
Yeah, it seems like a very big deal. Hopefully we get some traction on this interview. I mean, would you be willing to do a debate if someone likes trying to disagree with this stuff? Because it seems pretty straightforward to me, but if I know there's been some pushback on some of the stuff you're saying.
I would do a debate on this, but here's the funny thing. So most of the people that are arguing about this are arguing about hijacking Bitcoin from the perspective of Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash
Yeah,
and
that's
these
not
wars that happen within
that
Bitcoin.
argument's not
That,
happening.
that's not what I'm talking about. The threat. So this is my argument about going all the way back to the whole point of Bitcoin. The point of Bitcoin after the 2008 collapse was we need money that we can use, that's sound money, and that we won't have these filthy bankers in the middle of,
Yeah.
or governments regulating, right? We don't have that because Bitcoin can't be that. Bitcoin still only does 7 transactions per second. But there's one other problem with Bitcoin that I didn't mention. Bitcoin is not anonymous. In fact, Bitcoin is heavily tracked because it's an open ledger. So once you know one transaction that somebody did, you can actually track their entire history. There's a company called Chainalysis that since 2014 has been working with law enforcement agencies around the world, working with cryptocurrency exchanges to track and identify everyone's Bitcoin transactions. Last year, I had 3 different people come to me with either business disputes or a divorce. And this is how bad this has gotten. Private investigators can now earn a certification in Chainalysis that gives them access to tools where they can track Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So in this one case, they were able to find more of this person's Bitcoin transactions going back over a longer time period than they could get from the bank, because the bank typically only holds records for 7 years. So if you understand that the threat is technocracy, that the threat is having money, imagine COVID under this situation. Imagine, again, I mentioned this before, but they could determine, hey, your business, you're a non-essential business. We're shutting off your access to money. We're shutting off your control to the supply chain. This isn't a conspiracy theory about whether the government will do these things. We lived through this.
Yeah,
So this is
that's
no
what made me
longer
political is COVID. They forced it on me. Oh, this is really concerning. I think it's what it is. People don't want to hear this because Bitcoin, the idea is so amazing of a way to keep, cut the government out. They don't have control. They can't track our stuff. And then boom, you see the opposite. So it's like disheartening. So people don't want to, they want to reject the idea. But I think this is very concerning. We need to figure out a way to make it actually for the people again.
Well, we need to make it for the people, but the problem is that with the people that are trying to put the alternate position on this, Bitcoin is not an alternative to this tyranny because it's still 7 transactions per second and because it can be tracked. So people still they're taking the narrative.
Can it be fixed in your opinion?
From 15 years ago. It can't be fixed. Well, right now it's actually getting worse. There are actually debates now going on within the Bitcoin community to make it even less useful, to make the blocks, to make it so that you can put less information.
They really just want it as like gold that the government
they want it as gold.
That the government can
and there's this clip that I play, which is it's like 2 minutes of Roger talking. It's the first time I saw Roger talking about Bitcoin from that conference in like 2012. And then there's Michael Saylor, who's now the front man for this. And everybody is all enthusiastic about Michael Saylor, who has this company called Strategy, and he keeps on buying more and more of it. But what Michael Saylor says in his clip is Bitcoin isn't about competing with the dollar. It's not about competing with the euro or MasterCard or Visa. It's about complying with Know Your Customer. It's about paying your taxes. And it's about being digital gold. Well, I will tell you that, okay, well, even if you bought the argument that it's digital gold, what do we have as an alternative to these tyrannical central bank digital currencies and stable coins that are completely controlled by the government? We now don't have an alternative to that. And so we need this, or we're basically going to find ourselves living in a complete digital prison. So my argument isn't about which flavor of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
The only way that you can defeat a technocratic state like this, a surveillance state, is through privacy. So most of the people that want to debate me probably think that it's a debate about Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin.
I think that's
I've
what a lot
lived
of
on
people. I think a lot of people
cryptocurrency.
miss the point of it. That's what it seemed when I was asking people, "Oh, why is this a scam?" And they weren't even addressing anything that the issues were. That's exactly what that's what I run into because people are like mad at me for talking about it. And I was trying to figure out what their issues were, and it doesn't even seem like they were looking at the same issues I was looking at. It's like we weren't having the same conversation.
Right. So I've been living on crypto since 2019, and I've used different cryptos.
Yeah,
I'm not what's called a maximalist, and these things turn into like religious cults. Like you can't,
I've noticed that.
if your project deviates from their project in any way, then you're a heretic, and it's a horrible thing, and whatever. I'm a freedom maximalist, and we need to do everything that we can to get people out of the current system. What I've been saying, even when I ran for president, is if you want to stop funding these wars all over the world, if you don't like our foreign policy, if you want to stop funding both sides of whatever's going on in Minnesota, stop using the dollar.
Yeah.
If we are complicit in using that, but the solution to this, I've moved entirely into privacy coins. We need to be able to engage in transactions that aren't on an open ledger that can be tracked and frozen. And so I've moved over the last couple of years entirely into either physical gold or silver, which is rare for day-to-day transactions.
You need to have the gold and silver. Don't have paper, because there might be more of this stuff that doesn't exist.
Correct. And by the way, they'll tokenize that and track that as well, so it can be confiscated and so on and so forth. Not to veer too much, but I mean, FDR confiscated gold. Now, what's making this digital gold analogy, people are now buying Bitcoin through these ETFs. So like BlackRock has an ETF, and Fidelity and everything else. Analyze the contracts. The contracts say if something happens to the Bitcoin, if they're stolen, you don't even have FDIC insurance. Mm-hmm. There's a clause in there about this could be confiscated. You know how much easier it would be for the government to go to BlackRock and say, hey, we've decided we're confiscating Bitcoin. Yeah. They'll take all of the Bitcoin in the ETF. Yeah. Right? It's not even great when your thing is completely trackable and now you're holding it through third parties that are regulated. You have no control.
You don't trust Larry Fink to hold your Bitcoin?
Yeah. I mean, Larry Fink, and then he holds it at Coinbase, which Epstein.
I actually have some crypto in Coinbase, but I was transferring. My friend was telling me to transfer it out. Some of it I transferred to like Zano and FUSD. He's a big Bitcoin guy. That's what he was. I don't know a lot about it, but that's what he had me switch some of it to. Not all of it, but
so this is what I've moved to privacy coins, and I first started with Monero, which is kind of the
I heard about that one
too. The most known player. But over the last 18 months, I've moved, most into something called Zano, and Zano is a privacy coin that was created by the same guy that actually created the technology behind Monero. So it's kind of it's got hardcore tech behind it. But what's neat about Zano is Zano allows you to create tokens. You can tokenize other assets. So just like if you look at what the governments are doing and these other players, they're tokenizing the dollar, they're tokenizing everything else, but they're doing this in a way that they can control it. Zano allows you to tokenize different assets and trade them with complete privacy. So I'll give you one example of tokenization with Zano. It's something called Freedom Dollar. So Freedom Dollar is a stable coin. So FUSD is the ticker symbol. One FUSD equals $1, just like Tether. Except the difference is Freedom Dollar isn't backed by US Treasuries. It's actually backed by over-collateralized Zano. It's what's called an algorithmic stablecoin. So you're not funding government tyranny when you use this, but it's completely private. It has Monero level privacy. So I use Freedom Dollar. Another example, and you ask, is there anything that can be done?
Yeah, I was just talking to these guys on Twitter, the Zano guys. We were going back and forth because I was, like I said, friends said it was good, but it's like I'm trying to, like all these projects, I'm trying to track down and make sure it's legit. But the guys seem cool, but that's funny.
Well, it seems cool. Well, I'm actually in Mexico City right now. I'm going to be speaking at a conference called Monerotopia tonight. So it's going to have all of the privacy projects there.
So all these privacy projects are great. Monero, that's the other one that I've been hearing a lot about. Monero and Zano are the two that I've heard about.
Yeah, Monero and Zano, and I like them both. I use them both. I like Zano because I think they're bigger applications, but we need both. In fact, we need more. We need more privacy projects.
Yeah, I'm not going to pick one and like be like, hey, this is the one. Just like go to a privacy. Yeah, we want a few of these. I don't want to be one of the guys that like, hey, this is the only thing I believe in. Back to Freedom Dollar real quick. So that is basically for like, so you're actually buying and selling it really fast. I'm sorry, I'm a little confused exactly how it works.
So this is for making normal payments. So Zano, like other cryptocurrencies, it's somewhat volatile, although
Yeah.
it has there's some attributes to it that I like. People buy it because they need it to use it for these other
Yeah.
projects that are tokenized on Zano. But I'll hold Zano, excuse me, a bunch of Freedom Dollar in my account, and then I use it for living expenses
Yeah, I
so
have that
that
on
I
my
don't have
phone
to
now.
deal
My
with the
friend taught me
dollar.
how to put my Bitcoin on here, and I think that's what he used, right? Just scan it like when I buy food now, because I didn't know how to do that. I'm like, oh, cool. Now I can just scan this and like a credit card.
Yeah, so there's a credit. So there's another part of this that I use something called ZBEC, a ZBEC Mastercard. And this ZBEC Mastercard, you can actually load your Freedom Dollar right onto this Mastercard, which you can use everywhere Mastercard's accepted. So I'm literally in Mexico City. Everything that I've purchased on this trip, from the airline tickets to the hotel to Uber and
Yeah,
everything else, I purchased using Freedom Dollar, which I loaded onto this ZBEC Mastercard. It is my go-to thing. So as I said, I've been living on crypto, I guess it's 7 years now, and it's been hard.
yeah,
There have been a lot of projects have failed and everything else. This is actually the easiest way to do it. You can do it right from your phone. The funds get transferred instantly. Sometimes when you use
yeah.
other cryptos and other services, you have to wait hours, in some cases days. It's instant, and then you're off to the races. And so Freedom Dollar is my go-to for living expenses. I hold on to Zano because I think it's the cryptocurrency that's going to be used
Yeah.
for these tokenization projects. And
But
but
I think you
then
can
one
actually
way that
can't you put other crypto on there too? 'Cause
other crypto on the ZBEC
I
card.
no, not on the ZVIC, on the Zano, because I believe I have Bitcoin on there. My friend helped me set it up, so it's like
Oh yeah, yeah. So there's this thing called confidential layer
yeah, it has. You can have
that
Bitcoin on there. You can have Ethereum, all that.
yeah. So you ask, is there any way to fix
I just looked.
Bitcoin?
There is, yeah.
I,
I want to make sure it
it
wasn't confusing
doesn't
how I
look
had it.
good. Well, it doesn't look good from the standpoint of, if anything, they're making Bitcoin, more expensive and more complicated to use. But and it's, has this issue of, I want to explain how bad the issue is, because I'll talk about the confidential layer thing in a second. The United States government has 325,000 Bitcoin. How do you think they got that Bitcoin?
Seized
They
it.
didn't mine them. They didn't buy them. They stole them. They confiscated them using civil asset forfeiture. So all of these people that are out there saying this is freedom money, the government can't stop me. They can't, not my keys, not my coins, that kind of thing. Well, here's what happens. The government tracks the transactions. They find out which ones are yours, and then they come to you with a court order and they say, well, here's the deal. Yeah, you can hold on to your keys, and then you can spend the rest of your life in prison.
Damn.
Well, so far, when that offer has been made, people have unilaterally decided they would rather give up their Bitcoin than spend time in prison. And so now the US has 325,000 and other governments all over the world. Well, now there's a whole precedent, and now there's all of this tracking. So Bitcoin is not a way to save, to protect your assets if the government can identify it and seize it. Now, this thing called confidential layer allows you to create a tokenized version of your Bitcoin and essentially make your Bitcoin private and Bitcoin spendable. So you mentioned, I don't know which wallet you're using or whatever, but you can have something called BTCX in your wallet
Yeah.
that you can then spend just like you would spend Bitcoin, except with, it's faster and with lower fees, but with complete privacy. So that's another
Yeah, I'm terrible
application
at
of
technology.
Zano.
Don't understand it. So my friend set it up, but then he put it onto a credit card, and now it's like Apple Pay where I can just scan it. I
Exactly. You
don't,
can
he
use
did it
Apple
pretty quick,
Pay.
so I don't think it was that difficult. I'm just terrible at technology, so
No, it's quick. You go into the wallet, you click on a link, and then you click load funds. It's actually as easy or even easier than using a bank account.
yeah,
But your underlying assets are private, and yeah, you can use it with Google Pay, you can use it with Apple Pay, and you can even use, you can make your Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and there are more and more cryptocurrencies. And so Zano allows you so you could imagine a future where people, instead of having these, you tokenize your stock
yeah,
using Zano. So now you have, private shares instead of public shares controlled by BlackRock. I've been working on a project called OSARA, which is a medical tourism marketplace.
Mm.
So in the United States, every minute somebody files for bankruptcy due to medical costs in the United States.
the richest
Every
country
minute.
in the world, and we can't have health care, but we can fight all these wars and bail out bankers. It's
Yep.
disgusting.
Well, 75% of those people actually have insurance. This isn't a question of they didn't have it. The insurance doesn't actually provide catastrophic coverage. And so it turns out our healthcare costs are the highest in the world. The quality is really low. So we created this database, global database of medical tourism destinations. You can go to different countries and save up to 80% on your
Yeah. You're gonna
costs
get better treatment most of the time.
with better treatment. And so what I've done with that is, one of the problems with medical tourism is you have an issue of, if you're trying to wire money from your bank or you're using a credit card, a lot of the banks they automatically flag international transactions. And so something like Freedom Dollar used with medical tourism is a great opportunity to make it easier for people to go abroad and to get better healthcare outcomes.
It's so insane we're even having this conversation that we should have to talk about traveling to a foreign country to get medical treatment. But I rarely go to the hospital because I think they're absolutely disgusting, filthy, dirty. I had to go to the hospital in Thailand for a bad staph infection. And I was like, dude, this is going to be terrible. I went in there and I was blown away. It was way, way cheaper, cleaner. The doctor was more knowledgeable. I was in and out. It was like $150. I had a staph infection in the US. It was like $2,000. Like, the doctors had no clue what they were doing. I was in there in like 5 hours. That was one of those moments that I was just like, whoa, why does Thailand have better healthcare than us? And I'm sure it doesn't count for all issues. And I'm sure but we have the best. If you have a ton of money, you probably can get the best doctors here. But for just walking into two regular hospitals, it was Thailand was 10 times better.
Well, this is wild. So in researching, putting this together, I found some interesting things. Thailand is the biggest destination in the world for medical tourism.
Yeah.
It's a $100 billion industry. $8.7 billion of it comes out of Thailand. And here's the other thing. So doctors, really high quality doctors, hate the US system because their hands are tied. They're basically told by medical boards and insurance and big pharma what treatments they can even offer. So what's happening is, good doctors are leaving the United States and they're going to these other destinations. And so, like your experience, you can actually find other YouTube videos where it's like, when you go to a hospital here, it's like a prison.
Yeah,
it's
horrible. It's absolutely horrible here. I hate hospitals.
Yeah, the system here it's like the Flintstones, and you go to Thailand and it's like you're in the Jetsons.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it, because I was, obviously you could imagine I was going there with like fear, like, oh man, this is going to be a nightmare, and just the exact opposite, and it was just, that shouldn't be. We shouldn't be the richest country in the world with the amount of taxes we pay. Just have complete failures of hospitals, schools, crumbling infrastructure. It's this whole separate topic, but it just gets frustrating.
Well, this is the whole point of all of this. So what I've been saying is, stop using the dollar. Start using privacy coins, start using gold, start using silver, but then start building parallel economies, start building medical tourism, start building marketplaces for food freedom where you can actually buy. I mean, our food supply.
That's another, it's just poison. They're poisoning people. Everyone's sick. That's a big part of it.
Every single one of those are opportunities for building marketplaces that you can use with privacy coins and get completely outside of the system. We're never going to win inside the system. Like, I think Thomas Massey's great, and what he's done with the Epstein file is the only positive thing I've ever seen from a politician in my entire life.
Yeah.
But we're not going to fix the government, but we have to stop playing in their rigged system with their broken money. But understand, if you think the money's broken now, wait until it's digitally programmed with Howard Lutnick and Cantor Fitzgerald backing and controlling the entire money supply. It actually gets worse, and it gets worse fast.
That's my concern. They're closing this all in at once. The Palantir, their surveillance state. It's something like we have to act now. It seems like there's not much time left. That's why this Bitcoin is not an aspect I understand that well. So this conversation has been extremely interesting. The whole idea of them being able to watch every one of my transactions and turn it off like that, I don't like that idea. I don't think most Americans do. Some morons might like it. Just back to Thomas Massey real quick. You watch yesterday any of this stuff with Pam Bondi, then you see these MAGA accounts praising her and stuff. It's like, this is not a left or right issue. It's like, people are messing with our children. That is not a Democratic Republican issue. If you're supporting this, fuck you. Fuck anyone that's supporting these scumbag degenerate fucks that do this bullshit. These MAGA accounts that want to be, look at that traitor Massey. Pam Bondi schooled him. It's like, you guys are fucking morons. They're still withholding, 3.5 million files. We've already seen how disgusting what they have released are in there. So we can only imagine what must be in the remaining files that they're still withholding. And we have people praising this on because making it a left and right issue.
And are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me still or no? Hello?
Oh, yeah. Sorry about
I
that.
think,
Something
I
happened
like
to
your
my
sound.
internet.
Yeah, no, I think it's just fucking. I'm just pissed off people making this a left or right issue. Same thing with this money thing. This isn't a left and right issue. It's them versus us. This isn't Democrat versus Republican. It's like way bigger than that.
Well, and this is the thing. So what I've been trying to educate people on is technocracy. People don't know what technocracy is, but I want to explain this a little bit. Technocracy is a movement that actually started in the 1930s. It was like a formal organization. There was this thing called Technocracy Inc. And they'd all get together, they'd wear gray suits. And I mean, it looked kind of weird, even to the point where GM made a Technocracy gray because they would all drive cars with the same color. But this ideological movement basically said this: the average person is too stupid to make decisions in their own life. We need to have scientists and engineers make decisions for people. And we need to change the economy from being a system based on price and supply and demand to being a system based on energy credits. So this literally was an idea that started in the 1930s. It gained some momentum. They had some internal division, but it was picked back up again in 1973 by David Rockefeller and this guy Brzezinski when they started a group called the Trilateral Commission. And the Trilateral Commission, their whole thing was to kind of reignite this technocracy movement. And for the last 50 years, they have been doing this. They actually architected the UN's, it's called the New International Economic Order. But if you look at what the UN does, they have this UN Agenda 2030. They have these 17 sustainable development goals. It's basically a plan to regulate everything: the land, the air, the sea. This is where like the pronoun stuff comes
You'll own
from.
nothing and be happy.
City. All of this stems from technocracy. And so I view what's going on right now with these digital currencies. And even, by the way, I mentioned nobody knows about this. I've been one of the few people talking about the Genius Act and the Clarity Act and all these tokenization things. But real ID. So people will sit there and look at the UK and say, wow, I'm glad we're not like the UK. They're trying to push a digital ID.
Yeah.
We have real ID. For 20 years, people were pushing back on real ID, and then Trump gets in, and within
We just
120
folded.
days, now we folded.
Yeah, I can't believe people just stopped caring. Just a question back to the Technocracy or whatever, real quick. I believe two things. One, Epstein, there's an email saying he works for the Trilateral Commission, however you say it. And then I believe Elon Musk's father or grandfather was part of this organization. I'm pretty sure, right? Up in Canada. I think he's a technocrat. So he was part of this. And then he got like in trouble and had to move out to South Africa. And he pushed.
Elon Musk's grandfather.
Yeah, he pushed.
Elon Musk's grandfather.
Good, go on.
Sorry, yeah. Elon Musk's grandfather was the head of the Canadian Technocracy Party. Elon Musk is a technocrat. People get angry with me when I talk about this. Elon Musk did not come in to save free speech. He tweets all of the time about technocracy. He has stated he believes in energy credits. He has stated that money will go away and be replaced by energy. He has said he calls it universal high income, but it's basically universal basic income. The idea here is they will strip us of all of our assets. They will give us a social credit system, and then they'll give us an allowance. And if we don't follow their rules, that will determine what services
we get paid or cut off. If you're allowed medical, if you can drive this week, if you can eat.
And this is what's happening behind the scenes. So another thing that happened, people are like, Doge is great. They're going to, cut costs and do all this other stuff. What Doge did was connected Palantir to all of these federal government databases. So now they're taking all of our tax information. They're taking all of the other information from the DHS database and everything else. And then that's going to be tied to our real ID. And so this has even taken some libertarians off track, because it's being presented as we're going to reduce the size of government because we're getting rid of these employees. But instead, they're replacing it with AI. And I will tell you something. People get angry at this. I think Americans might be some of the most brainwashed people on the planet in terms of what we think we are in terms of our freedom versus the freedoms that we actually have. The only two categories that we rank in the top in the world in are defense spending and incarceration rate.
Wow.
Like, we don't even lead in innovation. We certainly don't lead in free speech. We're not even in the top 20 in free speech.
Really?
We have this view of ourselves that has been propagandized. And so people will talk about, we don't want to become like communist China, because in China, in certain cases, like on a province by province basis or town by town basis, they actually have implemented social credit scores. And there are like 23 million people in China that are at like the lowest level of the social credit system. And when you're at that lower level, it determines what healthcare options you have, where you can live, the speed of your internet access. Like this is
Wow.
real. This already exists. And so people are like, oh man, we don't want to have a system like this. You know, we're the land of the free. Well, let me tell you something about our tax code. Our tax code is 75,000 pages. It's 16 million words. What is the tax code? The tax code is a set of penalties and rewards set by the government. And if you don't follow the rules, they'll throw you in prison. How is the only difference between our tax code as a social credit system and what China has is they have an app, and at least people know what the rules are.
Yeah.
We have a system here that's too complex for anyone to even be able to follow. So, you know, imagine you bring in Palantir, AI, and everything else, and now you have AI managing the 16 million word tax code.
Yeah.
Is that better or worse?
Yeah, probably worse. They're going to take people they don't like and go through and just look for one little mistake or one little hole and then throw you in jail. His credit score is low. And if someone with I presume a low credit score, you know, I've been stripped on Twitter, I get videos removed on YouTube, demonetized everywhere. I assume that means I have a low credit score with the system.
Absolutely. And actually the UK, when this guy Nigel Farage was debanked, one of the things that he uncovered is that the banks in the UK were actually analyzing social media posts and were using social media posts for a scoring system to determine whether you were banked or not.
Yeah.
Debanking
is a big deal. That's the whole point of Bitcoin. Could solve that problem too, or Bitcoin or some kind of crypto. I'm not stuck on any crypto. I'm not like anti-Bitcoin if it could be fixed, but it's like we need something where they can't just shut our bank accounts out. That's like a big deal. I know several people that have had their bank account shut down, and it's like, and then what do? They send you your money and you can't put it into a bank. It's just
exactly. Then you can't get another bank account, and the whole system again. These rules, the Bank Secrecy Act, you know, the suspicious activity reports, there are a whole bunch of people that get flagged because they did transactions and then they end up on a list and they can't get a new bank account, even though they were never determined to have done anything wrong. This is the existing system today. The whole point, people early on with Bitcoin were saying you could be your own bank. And this was a big part of the whole idea. So some people like the WEF UN people were like, well, we want to bank the unbanked. And then the Bitcoin movement was like, well, hey, everybody should be unbanked. You've got this whole thing reversed.
Get rid of the banks.
Now you actually have this Genius Act where it's going to be, you know, banks are going to be able to custody cryptocurrency. Now the government's involved, and now you have BlackRock. We lost.
I love the name, the Genius Act, kind of like the Patriot Act. They're geniuses stealing our money.
The Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, right. These names of these things just act opposite. No, this is all extremely concerning.
It's extremely concerning, and the thing about it so you asked if I would debate. The things that I want to debate about or to talk about are the threat of technocracy and what we're going to do to stop this. If Bitcoin, becomes private or whatever, I'm for people using something that gives them their power back and the ability to engage in voluntary commerce all over the world. If Bitcoin can do that, I'll be happy about it. But the reason I'm sounding the alarm on this is that people don't understand that Bitcoin isn't that. Bitcoin is the opposite of that. Bitcoin is now about surveillance. Bitcoin can't be used for this purpose.
You don't think there's any way to fix it, in your opinion? You think it's like beyond that, or because people are? It's going to be hard to fit people. They're so dug in. You know, it's like telling a Christian or a Muslim is not real. It's like these people look at it like a religion. So, is there a solution, or you really think there's not?
It would, based on how the social structure around Bitcoin works, in terms of how the developers work, the miners in the community, it's a huge barrier to cross. But if it could happen, I'm all for it.
Like with enough people step forwards, because that ideally saving Bitcoin is the best solution. If that's not a solution, then you have to look forwards. But it's going to be hard to convince people of this. I'm sure you would agree, right? So if it's possible, it would be nice to try to fix it. I don't know if it is possible. I don't understand it enough.
I don't think it's not possible where so it's going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
So there was this thing called Lightning Network that was created. So the idea was, well, Bitcoin is slow, but then you can use this thing called Lightning Network where you can connect through a whole network of people, and I can move money to you through my friend or whatever. And it turns out that ends up being really centralized. And so the big companies now that are doing this, you'll find this guy, Jack Mallers. He's on financial press all the time. He's in this big closet with no clothes in it. He's wearing a baseball cap and he's talking about how great Lightning Network is. Well, then I went and looked at the terms of service for his thing. It's all know your customer. He tracks all of the transactions on the Lightning Network. El Salvador made Bitcoin legal tender, and then they gave all of the citizens this thing called a Chivo wallet. Well, it turns out it was on Lightning Network. The transactions could be tracked, and then the wallet got hacked, and all of the citizens of El Salvador were doxxed.
Damn.
So I'm looking at this from the standpoint of that's not a solution, but more importantly, this is urgent. Like we're in a worse situation than we were in 2008. In 2008, yeah, a whole bunch of bankers, gambled on the mortgage market and then they got bailed out. We're in a situation right now where we've gone through COVID. These people are willing to force, medication on you. They're willing to shut down your business. They're willing to force you to wear masks. And now we're going to give them digital currency that they can program and control. This is an existential threat. I actually say that technocracy is about free will itself. That the situation that we have now is technocracy versus freedom. And if they implement these systems with these social credit systems, we lose our ability to make our own decisions in our life. And so that to me is fundamentally about free will. So it's not red or blue. It's not the US versus China. It's this global technocracy. And right now it is moving with zero resistance. It's being cheered on primarily out of ignorance.
Yeah. They used ICE to push Palantir and people are cheering it on like, yeah, go. It's like, you realize it's going to be used against us. People are unable to step back and look at the big picture. I 100% agree with everything you're saying. Like, I don't really understand the Bitcoin aspect of it well, but I could see how there's a big net and they're just closing it in quicker and quicker. And I don't think we have very long. Like they say, there's a 2030 agenda. It's almost like they're trying to have it complete by then.
I actually think it's accelerated under Trump because they're putting things in place. So think about what's going on with digital ID, right? So now the real ID is expected to be fully digital in all 50 states by 2027. There's actually a big global movement now. There are 17 countries at the end of last year that announced they're going to be rolling out digital ID. I'm in Mexico right now. Mexico is rolling out right now a digital ID tied to a QR code that the employers have to enforce. Yeah. And so this is happening all over the world. Once they have the digital ID thing in, then now all of a sudden they can control your access to the internet. Then you're going to tie your digital ID to your money, which they're doing in Thailand. You mentioned Thailand now. You need a digital ID to access the banking services in Thailand. And they've even figured out a way to do this where they can also control your SIM card on your phone. So they actually know you can't have a SIM card that's outside of the system and outside of the identification framework they have. This has already happened. So for 3 years, I've been warning people about technocracy. And now I'm like, damn, they're actually putting this infrastructure in place. And people are sitting around arguing about, block size wars for Bitcoin from 2017. That's not the argument.
Yeah, I think people don't even completely miss what the argument is. That's what I think. Maybe instead of a debate, we bring a few people on that are big Bitcoin and have discussions of how to fix this.
Discussion on how to fix it.
I mean, obviously go into the coins and that, or is there a way to fix Bitcoin?
Exactly. How are we going to stop the surveillance state? How are we going to stop digital IDs? How are we going to make it so that, Bitcoin isn't completely tracked? And look, I will tell you, a lot of these people just don't know this. And part of this is, frankly, the people that were talking about the other side of this, that were trying to warn people about the fact that Bitcoin had been hijacked, they have been suppressed. People have been targeted by the government. We have developers. By the way, let me add.
Roger Ver has a gag order. I hit up trying to interview him. He has a gag order. So
yeah, Roger Ver is my understanding from reading the public documents that he can't speak for basically 3 years. It's like if he does anything more than a traffic ticket, then it nullifies his deal. I told you about my friend Ian Freeman. Mm-hmm. I do want to plug him. Is it freeiannow.org? He's in federal prison for 8 years for selling Bitcoin without a license. But here's the thing: it doesn't stop there. When you talk about Bitcoin as a potential solution, privacy is key. there are developers that have worked on tools to make Bitcoin private, things called mixing service,
Yeah.
where you basically mix a bunch of Bitcoin transactions together, and so that you can't figure out who sent what. Well, there are two developers from Samurai Wallet, Keone Rodriguez and William Hill, that are now in federal prison. Rodriguez actually just turned himself into prison in November of last year. This is happening under
There's a danger to
Trump's
people that are making
administration.
these things. They're being targeted.
So they've been targeted. These are open source developers that wrote code that protects our Fourth Amendment right? They did nothing wrong. And by the way, there's a similarity here in a lot of these different cases, which is these people that went about doing this actually consulted lawyers before doing it. So these are people that are in prison thinking they were doing the right thing, even trying to actually check the boxes and do the right thing, and they're still in
What was
prison.
the charge?
So
What did they charge him with? I don't. Some made up weird
they
like.
they usually charge you with operating operating without a money transmitter license. There are all of these. The thing
You can
is,
just make up laws. Find me a man, I'll show you a crime. Isn't that a Stalin saying? I don't remember who said that. That's an old saying.
that's absolutely a statement. And so there are two things that the government can do. They can charge you with conspiracy to do something. Which is that if you're not even, you didn't even necessarily do it, but you're around at the time, that's like a catch-all. And then they can charge you with things related to interstate commerce. And so these are like catch-alls for when they want to nail somebody that, didn't do anything wrong. But usually it's around, and then they'll try to accuse it's either operating without a money transmitter license or money laundering or terrorism. But the thing with this is, and as a contrast, so Ian Freeman's in federal prison for 8 years. There are banks, I can't remember if it was Wachovia or Wells Fargo, that was found to have laundered hundreds of billions of dollars of drug money for cartels. They paid a fine. No one went to jail.
Yeah.
People end up getting promoted over this. And so this is what I'm trying to say to people is the war on crypto is happening right now. And so even if you're a Bitcoin maxi, understand you're not going to benefit from the Clarity Act. The Clarity Act is designed to regulate crypto, but here's what's in it. All of your transactions will be tracked if you're going through exchanges in these third parties, will be tracked in real time with complete transaction histories. Records will be have to be retained for 5 years, and they share this information with not only federal government departments, but with foreign central banks.
Wow.
So this regulation is not about providing rules of the road that make it easier for crypto or that enhance our freedom. It's adding massive amounts of surveillance. And for the people out there that think that the surveillance works, it doesn't. The bank secrecy, I have a massive article coming out in the Brownstone Institute. It's like 12,000 words. And I not only talk about these bills, but I talk about the history of financial regulation in the United States. You have to understand, before 1970, there was none of this. There was no tracking.
Yeah.
And when did we decide that we don't have privacy as a right? The whole point of the Constitution was to limit what the federal government can do explicitly. We get all of the other rights. Now we're sitting here saying we're going to cheer on adding real-time monitoring of all of the transactions of all of our assets and give that information to foreign central banks.
Yeah.
Have we lost our complete framework on this?
Yes, we have. And for the people that don't fear the government, which there's probably not very many listening to my show, think about you go through a divorce. Then all of a sudden your wife can look through all your transactions, track all your money. Do you want anyone else to be able to track your money? It's just like, I don't want anyone to be able to track all my money. Or the government, like I should be the only one tracking my money and what I spend it on, what I buy.
Well, there's another aspect of this that affects Bitcoin as well. They're what are called wrench attacks. So it's not just governments tracking your transactions. There are other I'll call them other criminals besides the government that if you can identify somebody's transactions. I actually was researching this. As a private investigator, you can spend like 10 grand a year for a license, and this gives you access to this database where you can track all of this information. So if you find out, hey, this rich guy's here, and there are numerous cases of people being abducted, there are kids being kidnapped, and they're held ransom because the information's on a public blockchain. So privacy is absolutely critical. It is fundamental to fighting government tyranny. It's fundamental to fighting technocracy, but it's fundamental to fighting just run-of-the-mill everyday criminals that might try to steal your cryptocurrency.
No, exactly. That's a big problem too. It's privacy.
Yeah.
a little off track, but just back to the, the Epstein files, all the things coming out of there. Clearly, bankers are enemy. Something I found really interesting, the old crazy conspiracy theory, the Rothschilds running everything. You see Epstein saying, I work for the Rothschilds. What do you make of all that? To me, that was kind of like, I found it a little interesting. I thought it was a kind of a dead banking dynasty, but then you see him saying, I work for the Rothschilds.
So did I. That's one of those areas that I never even touched on. Like, because once you say Rothschild, it's like, oh, this guy's, whatever. It is what it is. And then when I saw that, I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. I even went to, well, how far does this go? Because there are a couple of documents, and I think he got paid $25 million for helping on a tax issue, and then $45 million for something else. But the way that Epstein reached out to Peter Thiel was he said, hey, as you know, I manage money for the Rothschilds, and there's $160 billion worth of assets looking to be invested in technology. And I'm like, wow, okay. So we need to dig into this. And I will tell you, I've created this website. It's a little rough right now, called technocracyatlas.com. But what I've done is I've taken all of the Epstein files, all of the images, all the emails, all of that stuff. But it didn't even start out with that. It started out with, all of this other information from like Patrick Wood on Technocracy and the Brownstone Institute. But I took all of these offshore leaks, the Pandora Papers, the Panama Papers, and everything else. I don't know if you recall that.
I know the names, but I don't know the details behind them. I remember hearing about those cases being big scandals, but I can't give you in-depth knowledge of them.
So basically what happened is somebody, found these legal and accounting firms' entire database of transactions for all of these like limited partnerships and offshore entities. So there's like 13.5 million transactions and entities in there that is this private offshore banking stuff. This is how money actually flows. So all of that data was released to the public. So I've taken that data, put it into the system, and the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to map the Epstein files to these 13.5 million offshore files. That's where you can really track money. And I'm telling you, this is where we're going to be able to really, for everybody always says follow the money, but they've set up structures where you can't follow the money, right? This guy's got this thing in the Bahamas, this guy's over here, and then it's real complicated structure. Well, between the leak of that data and AI, we're going to be able to determine how the world actually works. And I think that is going to change people's entire perspective of how the world operates. And so I don't know what the outcome is going to be yet, but I'm dedicated to kind of trying to find the truth by putting all this information out there, analyzing it, and then crowdsourcing it.
Yeah.
Because so many people have these small bits of information about these transactions and specific domain expertise for people to be able to all contribute together.
No, that's amazing. We'll be able to track.
And my theory on this is that it's probably like 500 or 1,000 people that are pulling all the strings. They try to make it like we should all be divided 50-50. In reality, if we can unravel this stuff, we'll be able to find the 500 to 1,000 people that are really running this show.
I 100% agree to your theory. I think there's a small group of people that are manipulating things, pulling strings. And we're kind of seeing this actually proven to be true. The Epstein files does show it. He's clearly not the boss. He's high up, he's a fixer. He's connected to all these people, but it's showing like an international criminal cartel is running the world. That's directly showing this. And the banking cartel is meeting with the Rothschilds. He works for the Rothschilds, his own words, like these things that they say you're crazy. There's also some dark shit in there. Things like when they kill babies, there's no smoking gun, but they're saying that type of stuff in their own words. Do they? I don't know, but there's some dark stuff on there. Like this morning, I got stuck on the Epstein files. You start going down these rabbit holes. I think you probably go down there too. So much redacted stuff, so it's hard to know. So much redacted still. But even like Wayfair, I put in for an example, that crazy conspiracy that was a few years ago. 369 resorts. So I'm like, okay, start looking it up. It's all like just mostly all just sales of Wayfair furniture. I look it up. It's a cheap furniture company. And then Epstein himself is like sending Woody Allen. I didn't get to look through them all. Sending people, oh, I sent you a gift. And he's personally concerned, hey, when is my item going to get here? So Epstein loves cheap furniture. I'm not saying, who knows? I'm not going to reach up and say there is something there, but it should be looked into. Do you know any billionaires that like love cheap furniture and buy their friends cheap furniture? I don't.
Well, I mean, look, we've got the images from Epstein's. I have something like 20,000 pictures on this Technocracy Atlas website. I haven't seen any Wayfair furniture in there. It's definitely not Wayfair furniture. But I will say this, I used to advise Ben Swan way back in the day. He had this thing called Truth in Media.
Yeah, I
He's the one
remember.
who broke the gate, and he was destroyed for it.
Yeah,
His professional reputation was absolutely shattered, and I can only imagine he was probably sued. Like he went dark for a really long time, and the stuff that he was saying and he was reporting on is in these Epstein files. All of the like pizza and jerky and
yeah,
all of this code words. I mean, even the FBI has a list. This is the coded language for
yeah.
pedophiles. Why is all of this stuff in the Epstein files?
Yeah, the slicing open pizza, with the Prime Minister of Israel, like, oh, we really had a lot of fun slicing open pizza with you last night. It's just disgusting, and it goes beyond what we want to imagine to be true. And like, but they're straight up saying something like, "Hey, did you enjoy the torture video?" It's like there comes a point where we have to be like, "Hey, maybe this is a little bit beyond what we want to imagine it could be."
Well, it is. And the one, I saw today that Steve, something about a bunch of sulfuric acid or something. And
Yes,
Bannon left an apartment, and I guess the whirlpool or the hot tub or something was
destroyed.
ruined with acid. Like, what the hell's that all about?
It's so bizarre, right? It's just all so bizarre. It's like we're having. I mean, I don't want to jump to conclusions and having a hard time processing it, but it's looking like some of the worst, most evil stuff imaginable. And the crazy conspiracy theorists were right about a lot of it. Even if they're right about half of it or a third of it, it's still absolutely disgusting and dark. Steve Bannon's a name I keep seeing pop up a lot. I don't quite like he tries to pretend like he's on the right side, but it's looking like he's tied in with all these same characters, right?
Yeah, I want to spend a lot of time investigating him further. So he has branded himself as this populist, and that he's for the people, and that he's like this, genius architect behind Trump for engineering the whole MAGA movement. Now, I have a theory, and I want to state that it is a theory, but I'm trying to track this down because I think he's actually one of the main people behind QAnon.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a great
because
idea.
the timing actually fits. And when you see in his correspondence with Epstein, it's clear he's just pulling the rug over people's. The populism thing is just a front for his strategy to gain more power. So they were even going to come up with a cryptocurrency. I believe they called it the deplore ruble. Was one of the ideas that they had. There are all these like schemes in the email thread back and forth. But Bannon, took over Brock Pierce's company that sold World of Warcraft. I think Gold actually sold the kind of digital assets. Steve
How did he
Bannon
take
is
that over? It's not clear.
no, it's completely clear. He worked for Goldman Sachs. Steve Bannon is Goldman Sachs. So like he tries to make it out like he's the everyday guy. This is a guy that worked for Goldman Sachs and is advising Jeffrey Epstein. They were going to release a documentary about Jeffrey Epstein the day before he was
Yeah, trying
arrested.
to clean up his image.
I mean, so I want to. We need to crowdsource the research on this, but I think that a lot of the MAGA stuff. Look, the QAnon stuff drives me
Trust the
nuts.
plan, Aaron. Come on, trust the plan. The plan is we will be
Well,
slaves.
but you know what? There's this other thing that's tied into the trust the plan, and it's this thing called Nasara and Jasara, and it's this idea that there's going to be a debt jubilee, and there are people that have been pushing this since before 9/11. And so there are people that stopped paying their mortgages and stopped paying their bills because they kept on being told, trust the plan. They're going to, they're going to retire all of your debt. And then there are going to be these med beds that you sit in that are going to cure all of your ills. So people stop getting medical treatment. I think all of this stuff is connected because it uses similar psychology in the timelines. So again, I put this as it is.
Yeah, no, it's just a theory, but there's some credibility to it. It makes sense because there's a little bit of inside information. They're telling you what you want to hear. They want you sedated, not resisting. They want you to sit back, trust the plan, not do anything, and let them take over.
I mean, just to me, the thing about the trust the plan, I remember during COVID that there were people that were sitting around waiting for and cheering the idea that white hats in the military were going to declare martial law, arrest all the pedophiles, hold tribunals, and then like execute them on closed caption TV. The worst thing about this isn't that they believed it, it's that they were cheering for it. When you're cheering for martial law,
Yeah.
like that's whatever was involved in creating the manipulation that got to that point is frightening.
These people exactly they'll cheer along. Well, that's the Palantir, same thing. And like people are like, oh, Trump's just playing them. It's like, well, I just watched 100,000 kids get killed in Gaza, and so I'm not really trusting that plan.
Exactly. I mean, one other quick thing on this. Again, Trump trying to make this a whole populist thing. His new chair of the Federal Reserve, this guy Kevin Warsh that he brought in. I don't know if you're familiar with his background. This guy, going back full circle to all of this stuff with Bitcoin and starting after the 2008 collapse, the new chair of the Federal Reserve was one of the key architects of bailing out the banks in 2008. This guy, Warsh, actually was directly involved in letting Lehman Brothers fail, but then he was involved in the bailout of Bear Stearns directly. He was working with Ben Bernanke. He was working with Tim Geithner directly. This guy's like one of the main guys. Then he worked directly on bailing out AIG. He's involved with this thing called the Group of 30, which is a group of it's another one of these like Bilderberg kind of things, but it's like central bankers, current and former central bankers from all over the world. And the economy is teetering. I mean, despite Pam Bondi talking about the $50,000 50,000 Dow price, we are actually in a situation where foreclosures and car loans and credit card defaults, we're getting back to, and in some cases worse than we were in 2008. I think that they know a crash is coming, and so they've brought in the person that can come in and bail out the banks again.
Yeah, that's crazy. And the bailout is just so ridiculous. These bankers, they knew they were giving out loans. They knew people weren't going to be able to pay, the balloon payments, all of this. So they engineered it. They thought they were going to get their houses given back. But eventually it got too out of control when just the crash came and the houses weren't worth hardly anything. So what do? Go to the government. Hey, we need to get bailed out on this. But the people that lost their homes, they didn't get bailed out. The government wasn't like, oh, you miscalculated here, we'll bail you out. No, instead it's the people that caused it that got bailed out.
Well, not only that, it actually gets worse. So you would think whatever happened with the bailout, you would hope that they put in protections so that it doesn't happen again. What's actually something that's interesting that you should look into called the Great Taking. They've actually changed the laws in all 50 states. So let's say we have another big financial collapse again, and let's say your broker that you have your 401k and ETFs through goes bankrupt. Well, you might think, well, hey, those are my funds, right? So I'll just get those funds back and I'll go to another broker. Well, it turns out they've changed the laws so that actually your broker's secured creditor gets paid before you do. So in other words, the largest 4 banks, if there's a big financial collapse, will end up with your stocks and bonds in your retirement portfolio.
So the banks get it instead of us. So it's our money, and the banks will get paid our money instead of us. We're not.
And it's happened.
People aren't angry enough.
It's happened legally. They've changed the Uniform Commercial Code, it's called, in all 50 states. So what I've been trying to warn people about is they've already done this contractually. By the way, one thing that I like to say to people is we already own nothing. We just don't realize it. So the average person signs like 200 of these Clickwrap agreements every year. So, when you iTunes or Microsoft or even your bank, you get sign up for a bank account, everybody just scrolls to the end and clicks accept.
Yep.
Well, I did an analysis. If you read these actual agreements, it would take the average person 2 hours a day, 365 days a year to read the agreements, just to even read these things. But when you do read them, and this is what AI is good for, we've already given away our privacy. We've given away our economic ownership. We've given away our basically our rights to even contest anything that went wrong. And I'll tell you how absurd this is. A doctor died of food poisoning after eating at a restaurant that was on a Disney property. And Disney tried to use his Disney Plus online service agreement to get out of the liability. So in other words,
the thing that he got for Mickey
Mouse, the contracts are so broad that they were trying to use to get out of this liability. It's insane what we've given up. And so I've created this ownnothing.org site. It's a free site, but you can actually realize, hey, you don't own the money in your bank account. Yeah. They can cancel legally. I mean, they can kind of do whatever they want with it. They can cancel your account. They can share your information. Yep. You don't own your stocks or bonds in this financial collapse. Do you even own your house? You pay
You have
more in
you have
interest on
if you
your
don't
mortgage.
even if you pay your mortgage off, you still have taxes. If you don't pay that, you have to they'll take it away.
Yep. So we've been scammed. So the thing that I'm advocating for is exiting the system, starting with money, but exit the healthcare system, build parallel economies. This is what we have left. We're not going to win within the system or voting, but we can vote with our feet and we can vote with our own actions. And it doesn't take very many of us to do that, to stand up. There's a lack of courage,
Yes.
but it doesn't take. And by the way, the people that do have courage, they get imprisoned. That's part of it as well. They shut up people like Ian and people like Roger because they speak the truth. They speak uncomfortable truths, but we have to continue to speak
A
up
lot
and
of
to get
people
others.
killed themselves and stuff too
Yeah, exactly.
when they're not depressed. As many of you guys know, I run a free speech podcast. That comes as a price. It's being demonetized everywhere. So one way to support the podcast is to buy your books from AntelopeHillPublishing.com. Today's selection is The Trans-Industrial Complex. This book covers the money-making machine of the trans industries and shows it's not to help people, but to make money and get rich. So again, if you want to support the podcast, go to AntelopeHillPublishing.com and be sure to use promo code FIGHTBACK. That'll save you money and support me. Thank you.
Yep.
So
Yeah, you shoot yourself in the back of the head
exactly.
twice.
6 times in the back of the head.
Hey,
So
hey, well, yeah. Now that we're talking about this, now I'm like, all of a sudden, now they're saying Kurt Cobain was murdered.
dude, he was talking about some sex trafficking thing I saw yesterday, and then it's like I haven't gone down that rabbit hole, but I saw him talking about how girls were abused by high level people, and then he blew his head off. Maybe he blew his head off, but if I was a huge rock star, I wouldn't blow my head off. Life's pretty good when you're like famous. There's obviously there still could be downsides, but like it's harder to be depressed when you're one of the most famous men in the world.
It is, and actually, I had a person that I went to high school with who killed himself after that. That was kind of motivated by Kurt
Yeah.
Cobain, and now it turned out that that might even be fake.
And he was such a star at the time. For the younger people might not know, he was just like an epic, almost like a godlike figure. People like looked up to him, admired him. And he blew his head off with a shotgun, I think, allegedly.
Yep. Yeah, allegedly, and then
Michael
it turns out.
Jackson, you start looking into, he realized that might have been a setup. How the people that control the banks also control over information.
Yes, they do. And so anyway, I hope the Epstein thing again. I hope we can't let go of this. We've got
No,
to continue reading
we're not
this.
letting
We got
this
to add
go.
more input, and we got to hold people accountable. But not only hold people accountable, just stop using their money. Right? I mean, this is how they manipulate us. I mean, they
Yeah.
manipulate people into think, oh, what's your credit score is how well you comply with paying back a bank that printed money out of thin air. Like I actually like, why is that? That shouldn't be a badge of honor.
No,
It's like you're complying with these guys.
I went to buy a house and I had like no credit score because I've never bought. Never had a credit card. Never had bought my cars with cash. Ended up having to buy the house with cash because I didn't have a credit score. Couldn't get any credit because I thought it was a good thing I never owed anything. Shouldn't I have good credit? I've never owed anything. I should have great credit, but instead I have bad credit. But
Yeah,
they call us
it's
free people that don't pay their credit cards right. They call us freeloaders because we mess the system up. And realize that when you buy a car, you want to negotiate it before because as soon as they find out you're buying it with cash, they're disappointed. So realize it's a bad thing to tell them you're buying it with cash because they want that loan.
They absolutely want that loan, the whole system. So, I mean, I think Henry Ford actually made the comment. He's like, if people understood how the financial system works, they'd be rioting in the streets
Yes.
tomorrow. And I still believe that's true. People still don't know how it works. But I will tell you, if you do learn how it works right now, if you think that's bad, wait until we have everything tokenized. Wait until we have Tether with Howard Lutnick, and this becomes the digital dollar. It's worse than anything even Henry Ford could have imagined.
Yeah, Henry Ford's such a great American. He, the assembly line he created, I think the 40-hour work week. He doubled the pay. All other companies had to match it. He was innovative. Then he wrote these books that people weren't a big fan of, and he was obviously a controversial figure. But if you look back at the stuff, a lot of it's making sense. And you say how they'll treat us is worse than you imagine. I mean, we could look at Gaza. They have them under surveillance. How they're being treated. I mean, that might be how we get treated.
Gaza is a technocratic state. I mean, this is exactly what they're trying to do, and we know what the end game is. The problem with this is it's not a conspiracy; it's spelled out. Technocracy is not a mythical concept that you can Google it. They have handbooks. There are meeting minutes. There are meeting notes. In fact, they tell you what they're going to
Yeah,
do. Read the UN
they're not even really hiding
and
it.
W. They don't even hide it
You will
anymore.
own nothing and you'll eat happy and you'll eat the bugs. They tell you this.
And they're going to do that through the tokenization of our assets. And that's how they're going to do it. And that's why this is an important issue. So it's not about Bitcoin. It's about technocracy. And it's not even just about money. It's about the tokenization of everything that we own. That is, to me, the battleground for free will.
What do you think is the first step for someone wanting to get out of the system? Because this is all so very complex.
I mean, the first thing that I do, I've done workshops. My wife and I have gone to like 27 states and everything else. And I go through and I walk through, hey, here's technocracy and everything else. And then I'm like, hey, I would give people gold backs and then teach people how to, download a crypto wallet, download a Zano wallet, or download Edge wallet or Cake wallet, and get a privacy coin. And like I said, I like, Zano and Freedom Dollar. But start there. Get one of those privacy coins, get a ZBEC debit card, and make a transaction. Make your first transaction, because it's this big barrier. The problem that I found is, and this is why I said I don't like to even get involved in these, internal crypto debates, because when I've done these workshops, I would ask people questions. And what I found when I would ask the questions is more people had heard of Sam Bankman-Fried than Satoshi, who created Bitcoin.
Wow.
And most people don't know that Bitcoin was ever used as a currency to buy things. Most people only think of it as a speculative asset. So the majority of the world out there is not, they're not squabbling with these ideas, but they need to be made aware of the fact that it's technocracy is the threat. And so downloading a crypto wallet, getting, a Zano Freedom Dollar, and making your first transaction, what you'll realize is it's as easy to do that as it is to use the traditional banking system. It isn't this daunting task.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of work done to make the wallets easier, to make the technology easier. And so, you'll realize it's a similar experience, or in some ways a better experience than what you're already dealing with the bank, but you're not funding all of these wars, and you're not funding your own digital prison. So that's where I recommend that people start is with money. And then you can move into other things. I actually recommend that people form a medical trust, cancel their insurance, and start looking at medical tourism.
Yes.
Because one of the ways that we learned this during COVID, one of the strangleholds that they control us through the money, and then they control us through our perception of needing the healthcare system, which, by the way, doesn't provide
they don't
these great outcomes. But this is how they do it. And so if we can break out of that, then people will realize that, yeah, I'm not really dependent on this system.
Yeah.
I actually have control over my own life. I can choose which money to use. I can choose who I want to, transact business with. I can take control of my own health. I mean, the health system itself is garbage. I mean,
such
the public
garbage.
health guide and everything else is garbage, but it takes a long time. They've done such a good job with the indoctrination of trust the science, and these people with the white lab coats are these
only doctors can read studies. You can't read it. That's what woke me up during COVID. I just tried from fighting. I was reading all these studies, and I would say what I was saying. People are like, shut up, you're not a doctor. I'm like, I'm just reading the study. Why would it need to be a doctor to crunch this information? This is what I'm seeing. What are you seeing? You're not a doctor. Shut up. It's like they weren't even asking. Kind of like you're saying, they're not having the same conversation I was. Even my doctor friends I send it to, and I realized most of them weren't able to process anything other than, well, Fauci says.
Exactly. It's a complete appeal to authority, and you're responsible for your own health. You're responsible for your own money, and that's empowering. For a lot of people, it's frightening, and because of the way our schools work and everything else, people are conditioned to give up their free will. They're conditioned to believe in things outside of themselves. So my whole big thing is it's about free will. We need to take back our free will. Money is the foundational point of this, but healthcare in these other areas. And the other thing I would say about this is we've got to stop this white knight stuff, the believing that heroes are going to come in. I'm still baffled about the fact that we went through Operation Warp Speed and $7.5 trillion worth of debt, and then somehow a story was engineered where the guy that did that is leading the Avengers to save Western civilization.
It's just baffling to me how people could still be MAGA anymore. You're trying to protect these sex criminals and the Jeffrey Epstein files. He's clearly part of the system. She said drain the swamp. I fell for it for a minute. I'm not going to lie. I wanted a hero. I wanted someone to believe in, but I realized he was the swamp. Once he closed the country down for COVID, I was like, screw this. People, he didn't close the country down. Like, yes, he did. He pushed the closure of the country down. You can argue, yeah, the Democrats were saying he didn't close it long enough, but he still closed it. He still pushed Project Warp Speed. It's like, this guy is not going to save us.
No, he's not going to. But no one is. And so I think the key part of it is that we can be our own heroes. And I mean, this has got way off topic, but we could get into AI and a whole bunch of other things, but like figure out what you want to do with your life. The American situation right now is you have people working jobs they hate for insurance that doesn't actually help improve their health, to build retirement portfolios with stocks they don't own in companies that are building their digital prison. And that's literally the standard American situation right now. And if people could just wake up and realize, you know what, I can choose to opt out of all of this, then we can shut all of this down. But that is the only way. It's through individual action and taking back your free will, not voting or any of these other, white knights. Elon Musk isn't going to save you. Peter Thiel isn't going to save you. A lot of the people that are being shaped up as the next white knights, these are worse than the people that failed us, currently or previously.
Yeah, they create heroes. Back to medical real quick. I have a strong opinion on this because I was a professional athlete for 20 years. And, several times I go to the hospital or something, they would always recommend surgery, really push it. I always chose to rehab things by myself. I'm extremely healthy. I have no long-term injuries. I've seen so many fighters get injuries and go get a surgery and ruin their career. Their knee's never the same. The back's never the same. Now, sometimes they are. It's not 100%. And sometimes surgery probably is the answer. So I'm not an absolutist on this. But surgery should always be the last answer. I've seen so many people butchered by these surgeries. And that's just one example of the medical. Well, even if you look at the official documents show that medical malpractice is the third leading cause of death in the United States after cancer and heart disease. I can't remember which order it goes, but it's like they're admitting to like hundreds of thousands of deaths by a little medical error.
Yeah, absolutely. And our bodies have the ability to self-heal to a much larger extent than we're given credit to. So this is another part of the, so much of this. I mean, I've struggled with my weight on and off my entire life, in part because my parents followed and I followed the USDA food pyramid when I was growing up. I went through this situation where, I was overweight as a kid, and I went to a nutritionist, and the nutritionist said, you should eat 800 calories a day and you should have no fat. So they actually put a plan together that said that I should eat Snackwell cookies.
They're complete morons. These nutritionists are complete, utter morons.
It's a death cult. And so then you finally walk through that and you find out all of that advice was completely and totally wrong. And then you actually have to start to begin to explore, was this actually malicious?
I don't know the answer to that.
I've spent a lot of time fasting, and I did a 40-day fast, but I've done various duration fasts. Then you start studying fasting, and it's like, hey, your body starts regenerating new stem cells after 7 days. Your immune system reboots after 3 days. Well, there's no money in that.
No.
There's no pill. There's no surgery. There isn't even food. So, so there are things out there. And again, I'm not dispensing medical advice, but what I'm suggesting is that people should start learning on their own and trying to learn from first principles and trying to figure out how their body works, how the world works, because no one's coming to save us.
No, I pretty much agree with all that. The unfortunate reality, we don't want to admit it. We want to say, hey, there's a hero coming to save us. So I understand the Trump people, they need a hero in their life. Like, they need someone because things are tough, but he's not your hero. Like, we're the only people that can save ourselves. I couldn't agree more. It does get scary, though, when they're closing down the whole system on us and they're throwing guys in prison that are trying to create alternatives.
Yeah, and we don't have a lot of time. This is why, again, back to, I don't want to necessarily debate Bitcoin. I'm like, what are we going to do about Real ID? What are we going to do about Palantir? And by the way, that Maha has turned out to be fake also. They're working on now wearables, and they're bringing AI into Medicare and Medicaid. Well, this is kind of where you get to rationing healthcare. People like to talk about our national debt, but we have $200 trillion of unfunded liabilities, and most of this is Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Well, they're going to add AI, and now AI is going to be giving algorithms as to to ration care. So we need to exit all of these systems. We need to not be trapped by the healthcare system, by the financial system, by any of it, and even food. If I think food freedom is
Food
another
is huge. The food is just poison they're giving us, and even like the
absolutely.
factory farm meat and the eggs and stuff. It's just absolutely disgusting. You have these animals living in hell, and you're putting that energy into your body. It's like at least get like I know it's more expensive, but get some shit that's like raised properly. It's like people putting poison in their body and all these. You look at the ingredients on these things. There's this long list of things you have no idea what the words even are. Don't eat that food.
Yeah, no, don't eat it. And then you actually have to check food that used to not have those. They're adding stuff all of the time. I mean, I've even found, oh, I was eating this. I thought this was, grass-fed beef. And then it's like, why is there maltodextrin in it? It's crazy what they're doing. And it changes over time. But it's scary. The food supply is controlled by a small number of players, the whole thing. And it's moving towards tokenization and more tracking. I actually did a whole podcast episode on this as well. Like farming now is a whole thing. John Deere tractors, tied to the satellite. They're tracking all of the information.
Really?
Farmers don't actually own any of the equipment. They have massive amounts of debt. The whole thing is
Yeah, aren't they not making that much money now? The farmers aren't they struggling?
farmers are struggling really badly, and actually the tariffs have crushed small farmers in particular.
Yes, they're trying
So
to
you're
make
seeing
like
a lot of
big, massive farms. Maybe we could do another podcast on that in the future because if you have in depth on that. Anything on Bitcoin we want to close with, or any final? Let me see. I had a couple notes real quick. If there's any important parts we missed. Talk about Howard Lutnick.
Well, I do have one thing to say about Bitcoin that I didn't say, which is kind of important. I believe people should be able to make their own decisions on what they buy. The problem is that the story with Bitcoin is now moving into this area of force. And the one thing that I think is absolutely tragic was when this Senator Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming went to this Bitcoin conference and announced, hey, we're going to build a Bitcoin strategic reserve. So she literally, with a straight face, said, the US government is going to buy $1 trillion. We're going to buy $1 trillion worth of Bitcoin, and we're going to hold it for 20 years. And then that's how we're going to pay back the national debt. Now, this now is turned into the realm of, this isn't about whether I want Bitcoin or not. I'm being forced through taxation to buy Bitcoin through the government. But beyond that, not only do I not believe, for a whole variety of reasons, it's a great idea even as a store of value, Cynthia Lummis owns $500,000 worth of Bitcoin. So this would be the
She's trying to
equivalent of
drive
Nancy
more
Pelosi.
inside trading. Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi holding a press conference and saying, oh, hey, I want, here's a bill. The United States government is going to buy $1 trillion of my investment portfolio and hold it for 20 years. That's actually how ridiculous
So it's
this
not
thing
just Nancy Pelosi. I mean, she's rightfully called out for it because she's like one of the best stock trading records ever. But there's others doing the exact same thing. Like you said, Howard Lutnick, maybe at a far larger and crazier level.
I think Lutnick is the word. I think people need to do a full understanding of Lutnick and then also Tether, the entire history of Tether, because my concern is that this that started out as printing these digital tokens out of thin air that they couldn't prove were backed. Now it's like too big to fail because you have a Trump crypto advisor as the CEO. You have Trump's US Commerce Secretary backing all of the treasuries for it. And they're going to be too embarrassed to admit, oh my God, I can't believe we just put all this money and all this effort behind, a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. They literally could just, so let me make sure I understand this right. So they could just basically say they have Bitcoin, they don't, creating Bitcoin out, because supposedly you can't make any more Bitcoin. That's the entire purpose of why it holds values. But if they're saying they have Bitcoin, they don't actually have.
All right, there's another problem with Bitcoin that I do want to address, which is that one of the things that people say about Bitcoin, why they're so excited about it, is that there will only be 21 million Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
There's a problem with this, which is that, I mentioned before, so the way this works, you have these computers that solve these math problems every 10 minutes, and then the company or individual that solved the math puzzle gets this block reward. And every 4 years, that block reward gets cut in half until eventually it goes to zero. And then that's when about 21 million Bitcoin will have been issued.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the whole point of the block reward was to be an initial incentive for miners to secure the network. But the whole business model for miners was supposed to be on transaction fees. So remember, the idea before was if you were doing 25,000 transactions per second and you're getting small fees on that, you can actually build a lucrative business on that. But because there are only 7 transactions per second, there are very little in the way of actual transaction fees. So what that means is, as the block rewards go away, there's nothing to sustain the miners. And there's already been proposals and discussions that have said, hey, you know what? We're going to have to raise the cap. We're going to have to go beyond 21 million.
Oh, wow.
We're going to have to continue issuing these rewards to miners so that we can secure the network. So there's one of the things that's happened with Bitcoin is that a lot of the discussion has been about technical details, but they've fundamentally destroyed the economic model that makes Bitcoin work. And that becomes more problematic as time goes on and as this halving of the block rewards continues. So that's a massive problem that has to be addressed.
I have one more question, something I've always found a little suspicious. Bitcoin people get mad when I mention this up, but considering they use the NSA hardware, I believe, to create it, and Satoshi's this mysterious figure, to me, I always thought there was a possibility it could have been some government thing from the beginning. Everyone says I'm crazy for saying that, but what's your thoughts on that?
I think it's listen, at this point, I think that anything is possible. So I went through I was all in Bitcoin, and then I was all in all the flavors of Bitcoin and everything else. And now if I'm being honest about it, I have to say, I don't know who it is. And the thing for me now, it's actually, it's a humbling experience as you go through it. And I understand why it's tough for some maxis to go through this, because you don't want to admit that this thing that you thought was one thing is something else, right? It's kind of like, this is why we do this.
Talking about, they can't admit they were fooled.
Yeah, we do this. Yeah, you end up having to forgive yourself, right? That's actually that's a hard actual challenge to go through. And so I think it's completely, and I think that the challenge is that Bitcoin's not anonymous, and it is all on a public ledger. So I think that's a big flaw at this point. And so that kind of tilts me to leading to believe maybe this thing was kind of a backdoor surveillance system the entire time.
People always tell me that's absolutely impossible, but I'm like, why? And they can't really give me an answer. I hope Bitcoin can be saved. I just bought Bitcoin. So I really want Bitcoin to be able to get saved. I hope that's an alternative. So we should have some discussions and try to look at ideas. And I don't have the answers. I'm brand new to crypto, but a couple more questions to close up. Ethereum, do you have any stronger thoughts on that, or kind of the same?
Well, Ethereum's going through an issue now, which is that, they built their whole thing on this idea of having layers as well, having, building on top of, kind of like Bitcoin. They throttled the main layer, and then the idea was you're going to build these solutions on top of it. Ethereum is now talking about abandoning it. One of the things I don't like about Ethereum is it's proof of stake. And I actually like proof of stake if it's implemented properly. But to explain what proof of stake is, Bitcoin is proof of work, and proof of work means, again, you have these computers solving these math problems. And so whoever solves the math problem wins the block. With Ethereum, it's proof of stake. And who gets to add the blocks to the transactions to the blockchain is determined largely based on, how much Ethereum you hold. So it's actually concentrated in the hands of a small number of people.
The bankers can buy it and make the decisions.
So the problem that I have with Ethereum is it's kind of like the Federal Reserve structure, where it ends up being concentrated. And because it's also transparent, you can figure out who these big players are that are controlling which blocks get added. So this is my concern. But on the other hand, Vitalik behind Ethereum has talked about moving towards privacy. So I'm all for, we need multiple solutions, and I'm hoping that everybody starts to understand the threat of technocracy and people start working on scalability and privacy. Because again, I want to go back to the Project Hamilton that the Bitcoin core developer worked on, funded by Epstein. They were working on something that does 1.7 million transactions per second. So we, as an entire cryptocurrency industry, if we want to be able to compete with technocracy, we need to be able to collectively, as a group, be able to scale to handle transactions for the world, or otherwise we're going to get stuck.
Yeah. So I think instead of a debate, sometimes we have a discussion, try to get a few other people on and start trying to come solutions. I think they're trying to argue something you're not arguing, the people that are asking for a debate. Thanks a lot. Final things you want to close on, and also anything you want to plug, it's your book. People, I know you're on Twitter, Aaron Day, anywhere else. If there are any final things you want to hit too, we can hit any final subject you think there's something important we missed.
I think we covered most of the important areas, but I just to summarize it, I would say that this threat of technocracy is immediate. It's something that is happening in real time without resistance because of the way that it's been packaged politically. And so we are now in a situation where even here in the US, we are accelerating with digital IDs through Real ID. We have a backdoor CBDC through the Genius Act, and this Clarity Act, if it passes, and by the way, we should try to stop it, not to the extent that we have a lot of effect on it. This is going to add surveillance and programmability to every asset that we own. That's what's being put in place. So if I would say anything, we need to do everything that we can to understand that and to build parallel solutions outside of it. So I have a website, daylightfreedom.org, which links to 5 other websites that I have. I've talked about some of them here, but that's the one, kind of destination point. But all of the websites that I've built, all of the solutions that I've built are around exiting the system and empowering people with either information or actually tools, products, or services. And I would start by starting to exit the dollar. Download a crypto wallet. I would recommend, again, a Zano wallet or whatever. Get a privacy coin like Zano or Freedom Dollar, get a debit card and make a transaction. Learn how it works. Don't sit on the sidelines or think about it or whatever. Just that, because once you've made that transaction, you will realize that you can engage in voluntary commerce outside of the entire system, and that will change your entire understanding of how much power you have as an individual.
Great. Thanks so much. And I think we'll be having some more discussions about this because it's a new topic to me, but it's obviously extremely important. So
excellent. Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I think I'm going to air it tomorrow, so I'll let you know. I think I want to get it out right away since it's a hot topic. No, cool.
Awesome.
Thank you. Hey guys, I'm demonetized everywhere. So if you want to support me and the podcast, go to fightbackpodcast.com and you can buy some cool merch like the shirt I'm wearing now.